workshops that we're doing this year, this fall. We, of course, are doing them across the state, also in a variety of spots, including some faraway spots. So, for those of you, if you haven't checked out the full schedule and you see that you still want see this in person, these are being held throughout the fall across the state. But we have these virtual ones because we know we want to reach out and get everyone that we can in on this. Just a quick reminder, remember to use the Q&A function that you find in your little bar on Zoom. You might have to hit the more button. I know I had to get to it. Don't use the chat, but if you have questions along the way during this first hour about federal aid, please use the Q&A function. We have a variety of panelists and co-hosts available, including a lot of my staff, to help answer questions along the way. I won't be doing that at the end of my part, which is about 50 minutes or so. We'll take a couple big questions. I always have people like David Levy and Luann out there, some of my colleagues who help put this PowerPoint together, help put forth the last couple questions. Let's get going on this though. So 2026-27 FAFSA update. So that's the process we're talking about. For most of you, if you're high school counselors, you're of course talking about your high school seniors who will be starting this process, applying for aid to go to college, university, trade school sometime in the fall of 26, or possibly even the spring of 27 if they take a little gap time off. Let's talk about this. What we're going to cover today, we're going to cover creating a studentaid.gov account, that whole process, completing the FAFSA. We're not going to go into all the detail, but we're going to kind of cover those things that help your students and parents through the process and what's new out there, because some things are new for the 2026-27 cycle. How to appeal for more aid. We know that's a big topic that comes up. It's the what ifs, right? What if my parents' information on the FAFSA is not close to being accurate as far as income and such? We'll talk about how to get that process rolling. And then lastly, resources and helpful tips that you can provide, and tips for you on how you can help your students and parents through the financial aid process. You'll see in the chat, those are going to be some updates from the Student Aid Commission, are the partners of all this and the people who coordinate all of this. But again, if you have questions along the way, please use the Q&A function. So first, the big thing is, we want to know about how to create a studentaid.gov account, because it's the starting point for everyone, students and parents, to getting that FAFSA going. So in creating that account, it is the way that, and they're used to start, complete, and sign a FAFSA. We have there that note about instant verification. So this is something kind of new. It used to be, when a student would create their account or a parent would create their FSA ID account. I'm going to call it that probably quite a bit. It's the same idea. You may have to wait 2 to 3 days till it's validated and verified and ready to go. Now we're told it's going to be instant verification process that those studentaid.gov accounts are going to be ready to go right away. So there's no delay in that. On top of that, of course, dependent students, we're going to get most of our students coming out of high school, those under 24, they're not married, etc. And we'll cover all the etceteras later. We are going to need to have parents provide information, which means they're going to need to get their own FSA ID. And in a sense, we've siloed it off now. So this parents do their part separate from the students who are doing their part. So again, every contributor, and this does include even parents who do not have social security numbers, those who are from foreign countries and live in a foreign country, that will all still require them to have that FSA ID to complete their part. And we're going to talk about how how the federal government has simplified that process a bit. Big tip that you can offer to your students and parents, utilize a personal email account they do check regularly. Don't use one that's maybe been set up by the high school or even by an employer. And I say that only because we want to make sure that student or the parent has access to that account regardless of when they graduate high school, and maybe that account from the high school goes away, or for a parent who might move around jobs at some point. You want to make sure they're tying it to, like a Gmail, a Hotmail, some other type of account that they're going to be keeping with them. There is that link at the bottom. And again, this goes out as a PDF, this whole PowerPoint from the Student Aid Commission. So you'll have those links available to you to help your students. So again, we're talking most of the time students out of high school, coming out are going to be considered dependent students for financial aid and will require parent information. So, whose information do we need? The logic behind this has not changed. So, this is the same as it's been over the last number of years here. So, parents are married and they file taxes together. Only one parent really needs to create that FSA ID account. And the reason for that is part of course, creating the FSA ID account is to sign electronically the FAFSA on behalf of the person, the student on their part, the parent on their part, but it's also to allow information to be electronically transferred over from the IRS. I got a whole new fancy name, don't worry about it. But to do that, in the case of parents who are married and filing jointly, all for both and for parents, information can be transferred over from the IRS. But in the case, as that bottom box there says, if they did not file together, so they filed married filing separately, for example, then both parents will need to create their own FSA ID accounts so that when they get into the process, they can have their information transferred over accordingly. Now, parents who are unmarried but living together, both parents are going to need accounts because conceivably they should not be filing married. That's IRS rules, not mine. But as unmarried living together, we do need information for both parents on the FAFSA. Lastly, this category, again, this has not changed over the last number of years. But again, if parents are divorced or separated and not living together, because if they're divorced and living together, we kind of really go back to the middle column and need both parents' information. But in the case of a divorce or separation and parents living separately, the parent who provided more financial support in the last 12 months is the one who provides information on the FAFSA and is the one who will need to create that FSA ID account to, again, have that information provided. Now, in the case of biological parents who've divorced, and then we've figured out that, let's say it's mother who provides more financial support and has now remarried, we will need information for mother and that step parent. And realistically, if they haven't filed jointly recently, probably going to need both of them to create their own FSA IDs. So that's kind of the help who it is. Now, again, if a student is independent, they've married, then it goes to the idea that the student and their spouse's information. If the student is 30 years old and coming back to school and they're single, it's really just the student's information, won't need parent information at all. So federal student aid ID, there's a new workflow for inviting contributors. This was probably the biggest sticking point over the last year or so, where the student who gets their FSA ID, they start their FAFSA, they get along to the part where the FAFSA says you need parent information. Let's invite them. We're going to call them contributors. That's a new term the federal government has been using. And then they would need their parent's name and social security number and date of birth and all these other things. That's gone away. It's simplified. So really, if the student is the one initiating, starting the FAFSA, then they really only need the email address of their contributor. And in the case of where it may be two parents, they really just need one of them at the time. The FAFSA, once they get that first parent contributor started, will know whether or not they need to invite a second contributor along the way. So that's really a time saver right there. What's going to happen is that parent, that contributor, is going to get an email, and it's going to have a non-case sensitive code in it. They'll link out and then put in that code. And then again, depending upon, maybe that parent already has an FSA ID from before, maybe an older son or daughter went off to college, or maybe the parent had gone off to college. That's fine. They'll be able to log in. But if they don't have an FSA ID, at that point, they will want to create one. So then, again, the contributor can sign in, create their FSA ID. And this one only works, though, just as a note, if the student is the initiator on the FAFSA. Now, sometimes parents want to start the FAFSA, which they can for their student, but it's probably a lot simpler if they do it this way. Because if the parent does the FAFSA and starts it, in reality, what happens is then the parent will need all that personally identifiable information for the student to invite them as a contributor back for their own FAFSA. Easier if the student starts the whole process. As far as some screens that students and parents will see, so the student conceivably will see that screen on the left, that screenshot that we have where they get into the FAFSA, it tells them they need parent information. They'll need that email. They'll put that in there, and by hitting the button, they'll send the invite. The parent will again get the email with the code. They'll hit a button accordingly. They'll take them to this page on the right side, and they'll be able to accept that invitation by entering that code. And at that point, again, if they have their FSA IDs, which again, parents can be creating ahead of time too, just like students can be doing it right now before October 1st when the FAFSA comes out, and be ready to go with the FAFSA and this part of the process right away. So parents without social security numbers, we know we have some issues. Of course, there's some hesitancy on parents, but also the process of understanding how to do it, because it seems like a process that wouldn't work very well. Well, they have worked out some of the kinks in the program. So this process really does start the same. Everything I've talked about up to this point, how to invite a parent, etc. There is an identity validation process built in. So they use TransUnion. And basically, what happens is if there's enough information in TransUnion, one of the three big credit bureaus, to try to figure out the person is the person, they'll be offered up some questions to try to some knowledge-based questions. And those would be things like, you know, you had a rental agreement in a certain year, and what was your average monthly payment? Or you had a car loan from GMAC, and what was your total amount? You know, things that only people would know from their own finances. Now, if they don't get those, if they pass that and they get through those questions, great, they're validated. If they don't get the questions, not a problem. In a sense, they are ready to use their FSA IDs immediately anyways. There's no manual process. Remember, we talked, for those who've been on this before, a couple of years ago, where we had this whole manual process of having the federal government was going to collect the documentation to try to validate. All off the board until the Department of Ed can figure this out perfectly. So I do not anticipate that coming up at all for a little bit. But again, otherwise, parents without social security numbers can go through this process, create their FSA ID, and they'll be ready to go and usable on the FAFSA. Now, for those parents without social security numbers who also live in another country, we know there's that distance problem that sometimes creates some issues. You know, trying to solve those account creation errors because of different formatting of either names or addresses, phone numbers, etc. Trying to call the Federal Student Aid Information Center, that's the FSAIC there, the 1-800 for Fed Aid number. We know that can be a problem. Not a problem in reality. They do, of course, have live chat available, again, on our standard time, you know, during the day. So they'd have to plan that out accordingly. But also, we've been told, you know, when they're creating that FSA ID and working through their part of the FAFSA, you know, putting a period, a zero, or a space in the street address is fine. And even if necessary, skipping the phone number. It's not like the Department of Ed is going to call anyone. Generally speaking, they're not sending any real paper mail anymore. As much as possible, things are done all by email, and in particular for the student, once they're all set up, by going always to studentaid.gov to check the results of their FAFSA, where their FAFSA is in the process, and all of that. And just as a reminder, again, as you have questions, and I see they're all going out there and getting answered, use the Q&A function. If you don't see it on your screen, on the little taskbar on the Zoom, hit the more button and you should see it there. Chat is only for technical issues if you're having it, but if you have questions along the way while we're here on the radio show, please use the Q&A function. So that's FSA ID. Again, simplified the process quite a bit, the Department of Ed. It should allow students and parents who, again, can start creating them now, because they don't go stale unless you don't use it for literally 2 to 3 years or something like that. So as student, as they do it now, they're going to get into doing the FAFSA in October or so, we're fine. And then they're going to do the FAFSA the next year and the next year and all, because this is a repeating cycle. That's fine. It's going to be okay. It's not going to go stale or anything. And again, it's better that they do create those FSA's IDs as soon as possible. Let's talk about some federal aid programs, and because there's some changes, obviously, from the recent bills passed by Congress, but we're going to focus mostly on completing the FAFSA. So with federal aid programs, as far as Pell Grant goes, nothing really new there. As far as we know, it's going to be flat funded, and that's the request, which means the maximum award for the school year, 2 semesters, really, $73.95 for 2 full-time semesters. The lifetime limitation of what we call 600% is just means the equivalent of 6 full-time years or 12 full-time semesters. And again, a student who's going part-time the equivalent of how that works. So, if it's 12 full time, it would mean exactly 24 half-time semesters, etc. But that's how the calculation works for that. Nothing really new there. Federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grants, or FSCOGs. No, nothing new on that at this point, but up to $4,000 per year, priority given to Pell Grant eligible students. This program and federal work study work a little different than some of the others in that a school gets an allocated amount for the FSCOG and work study, and then they go about using the basic guidelines from the federal government to make awards to students. So FSCOG could be up to 4,000, but a school like mine, I give much smaller awards because I get a much smaller allocation versus like Pell Grant. If everyone who applied for Pell Grant qualifies at my school, they're going to get the Pell Grant. We don't run out of money per se in that program. Teach grants, it's a little less than 4,000 just because of the way it works in the law, but this is for those students going into teaching, and it does require a service contract of teaching thereafter when they're out of their undergraduate program. And if they do not fulfill that, it does turn into an unsubsidized loan. So students should be aware of that if they're offered that at a school where they're doing a program of education to become a teacher. That they really should know if that's really the line of work they want to do. Work study, again, varies by school as far as the amount they'll award, but it's basically the idea that if I award, say, $8,000 for the school year, a student could earn up to that at whatever the wage rate is, times the number of hours they're working for their on or off campus work. This is part-time work. Student loans, not a whole lot new there as far as we still have them, direct federal student loans, subsidized and unsubsidized. Award amounts vary by grade level. So, first year students can borrow less than second year, second less than third and fourth. Graduate school, we're not going to talk too much about that or whatever. Plus loans was probably the one area that had the biggest changes recently, as far as in that last bill passed by Congress. So now there is a lifetime maximum that a parent can borrow per student that they're borrowing on behalf of, and a year limit of $20,000 per student that they may borrow. Before there wasn't that limits out there. Just interest rates for federal student loans at 6.39%, and for plus loans it's 8.94%. So it's gone up a little bit in the most recent couple of years. Remember, use that Q&A function out there if you have questions. If you have stuff about state aid, that's going to be after I'm done with my first hour or so. And then so stuff about Cal Grant Middle Class Scholarship, save those out for now. We'll just cover the federal aid for now. Now I'm going to save it for John and the CSAC presenters handle some of the state aid stuff. That's why we're only talking FAFSA and federal aid right now. So what is the free application for federal student aid? Well, it's the form. It's the form the federal government created many, many years ago. It wasn't free back 30 plus years ago when I was going to college. Tells you how long ago. But it collects all the information, student and parent income and taxes and assets and household information to basically determine eligibility for need-based student financial aid. And so it's used, of course, by the federal government. It's a federal form. Most every state government also uses it for their state aid programs. And then colleges and universities can also use the results of the form to award need-based money from the school. And the reason is, the idea is this form comes down to, once processed, calculates what's called the student aid index. High or low, that number helps the federal government know if the student qualifies for things like Pell Grant straight out, because there's a direct correlation between student aid index and Pell Grant. And then also we use it in conjunction with looking at other items like what we estimate to be the cost of going to school for the year to figure out eligibility for all the other need-based financial aid programs. For those who did FAFSA many years ago, or remember the expected family contribution, or EFC, same idea. That's what the student aid index is now. It's that calculated value that, again, high or low, helps a college and the federal government determine what kind of aid a student may qualify for. So when and where to file, we've been told, crossing fingers, everything looks good, that it's going to come out October 1st in full force for the 2026-27 process. If you hadn't heard, there was some beta process available and beta testing, you could say. So some students and parents may got in on that. If you heard parents and students talking about that, that's great. If they did it through the beta process, which was over the last number of weeks here, their FAFSAs are good to go as is. They don't have to go back and do anything new after October 1st, unless, of course, they have to fix something, correct something, etc. But otherwise, it's submitted, it is submitted, it is good to go. But FAFSAs can be done at FAFSA.gov, which will reroute really students to studentaid.gov. But that is the starting point. We want to get students in and as soon as possible. Just a little bit about eligibility on this. Just kind of rehash of this. No real changes on this front either. But again, it's for students who are US citizens, students who are naturalized citizens, or permanent residents, students who have green cards, things who are students who are maybe parolee, asylee, or refugee status, all qualify for under this. If you have a student who has some other kind of status, most visa statuses aren't because they're not specifically an immigrating status, but there's a couple categories that are. Students in some of our territories like Micronesia, Palau, etc., are also eligible. They may not have a regular social security number, but because they're in a territory like, say, Puerto Rico or Guam, they could be applying for aid. If you run across those cases, again, best to point the student to the FAFSA website, where again, there's a lot of information to help them make sure, am I eligible to apply through the FAFSA? For those students who aren't, like our what we at the colleges call sometimes our AB 540 students, students who are undocumented, even if they're DACA and have a social security number, they're going to fall into the pool where they're going to probably apply for state aid only through the California DREAM Act application. I'm not going to talk to that today. I'm going to save that for our Student Aid Commission folks, who will talk about that after my hour is done, and they'll talk more about all the state aid programs. So dependency status, this is what we're talking about earlier when I was saying who's going to need to have parent information provided on a FAFSA. So generally speaking, students under the age of 24 are considered dependents, must provide parental information unless they can answer yes to any one of these questions. And a part of the FAFSA is going to say personal circumstances on top. So an independent student could be a student who's married but not separated. So unless there's a surprise to the parents of their high school seniors, I assume most high school seniors and such are not married. But again, some of you may also work in some community organizations where you do have older students or students who are married. Again, that would make them independent right there. And in that case, they would need their spouse's information on the FAFSA. Students who are in a graduate or professional program, professional school program. So students who've completed their undergraduate and are now in graduate school. Not that it's a thing to be done later, but that they are in it now. Students who are veterans of the armed forces or are active duty members of the armed forces are independent students. Students who are in a court-ordered legal guardianship, so through a court in their state of residence. One thing that doesn't qualify for this, which is kind of related, is a legal custody agreement issued solely by an attorney would not qualify the student to be a legal guardianship for FAFSA purposes. So that's just that one little area that's a little different. Students who have a court-ordered emancipated minor status, so they went through the process to emancipate themselves from their parents, and they're either an emancipated minor right now or were one until they hit 18. Students who are orphans or ward of the court or in foster care. Again, no change in the logic from prior years on this. So again, students 13 to 18, if they were in foster care system, even if they've been reunited since with their parents or adopted out, or they turned 18, if between the age of the 13 and 18, anytime they were in the foster care system, they would be independent. And again, orphans, those students whose both biological parents are deceased, would also be independent students. Those students who have legal guardians, legal dependents other than a spouse, so they have children of their own, really, most of the time. So students who have children of their own who receive more than half their support from the student would mean the student is independent. So a student who is unaccompanied and homeless or self-supporting and at risk of being homeless would be an independent student. So we've had a lot of, unaccompanied homeless youth unaccompanied youth, a variety of titles you might hear this by, but the idea here is a student who is unaccompanied, not in the custody of their parent or custodial parent, and is homeless or at risk of being homeless. All the different things that might mean a student is homeless would be an independent student. Sometimes this will be asked to be validated and verified at the school, and oftentimes it might be a case of a runaway shelter or other and federal institution that could help validate that. Sometimes it's a financial aid officer at the school understanding, does the student meet the basic criteria? They're unaccompanied and homeless youth. Now, for students who do not answer yes on any of these, they're not 24 or older. They're going to be a dependent student unless they have a dependency override because they have some unusual circumstances. We'll talk to this more in just a slide or two, just because we do know there are students who get down to this part of the FAFSA, and the FAFSA says you're considered a dependent student. We need parent information. But at that point, there is a part in the FAFSA that will at least say if they're able to or really unable to get information from a parent. And we'll kind of break down what that means because there's the unable to for a variety of reasons. We want to make sure that those students truly cannot get it for specific unusual circumstances. We can continue with the FAFSA, get that done. So parent information on the FAFSA, again, those students we'll figure it out at that point. That will also, so who needs that FSA ID as a parent is the same thing as who needs to provide information. There is what we call the parent wizard tool built into the FAFSA, and then we got that link down there at the bottom. Again, it goes back to the logic I was talking about for FSA ID. Married parents living together, both parents' information. Unmarried parents living together, both parents' information. Unmarried parents, either divorced or separated or such, it's usually the parent who provided more support. And in cases where they may have remarried, that's step parents' information. So one parent or two, no more, on the FAFSA will need to provide information for the student. So now what if a parent won't complete the FAFSA? So there's the won't complete versus can't complete because the student has no contact and such. So regardless, generally speaking, parent information is required. So even if a student is self-sufficient or isn't claimed on the parent's tax return, in general, for tax return, who claims who is between that person and the IRS and whatever the IRS rules are. It makes no difference on whether a student's a dependent or independent student. It makes no difference on which parent needs to provide information, because we do know sometimes, like in a divorce, one parent will claim them, but the other parent is really providing more support. That's again between the parents and the IRS. Who claims who makes no difference. Same thing in here. Even if a student does not live with the parents, they just move out on their own, would it mean that de-obligates from needing that parent information on the FAFSA? Same thing for parents, just because they refuse to provide the information doesn't negate that. Or living in another country, again, we know there will be some technical issues sometimes in trying to get that information. Foreign citizenry or being undocumented, again, we still would need that parent information. But what will happen if a parent won't complete? We know sometimes parents will refuse. So if a parent information is not provided because parents refusing to provide it, the most that the student will qualify for will be just unsubsidized federal direct loans, unless we can do a dependency override. And dependency override talks about these things on screen. You can see our what we think of as unusual circumstances where the student will not be able to get that information from parents. For example, parents are incarcerated or institutionalized, or maybe the student has been recommended or counseled not to live with their parents because of an abusive home environment, abandonment by the parents where they have absolutely no contact with the parents, or the parents' whereabouts are unknown, or maybe the death of a custodial parent in the case of a divorce, and thus we would not be able to get the information potentially from the non-custodial parent. So there's a number of reasons and things like this that a school can look at. The student does their part of the FAFSA up to this point and says, I'm unable to get information because of something like this, and continue through the FAFSA and submit it, and then follow up with the college or colleges are applying to about what they, most of the time we do call it a dependency override. We may call it other things like independent status appeal, But the idea is that we would need some documentation from the student, and this is oftentimes where many of you as counselors out there will be asked for letters because you understand the student's circumstances best about what happened and when, so we get a good understanding. Do they meet these kind of things where really it's a case the student is unable to get that information uh, from their parents, and thus at that point the school, by doing their part, and if they approve that dependency override, can make the student independent for financial aid purposes. Just so you know, there was a lot of confusion the first time they put these screens into order about those students who are not the unable to provide, but the parents are refusing to provide. The screen they see will be very similar to what you see there on the left. And there's the question in the middle there. Are the students' parents refusing to provide the information? The default answer is going to be no, because apparently there were some problems with that. And a lot of students got through that and didn't know why they didn't need parent information where they really did. And their parents weren't refusing to provide it. So the default answer would be no. But if they swap it over to yes, they're going to see what they see there on the right side. It's going to be that warning, that last minute warning there to say, you're not going to be eligible for anything really other than unsubsidized federal student loans. So what information do we need? No change in the logic here, really, as far as the timelines of things. So assets are still reported as of the date of the FAFSA being filed. So the day the FAFSA, the students working on their part, when we ask about the assets, and we'll go through what they are in just a little bit, as of the date of. Same thing for the parent. For income, we go by a variety of names. We called it prior at the start. That didn't make a lot of sense. Second previous tax, it's easy to just think of it this way. For our students who are applying for the fall of 2026, so 26-27 school year, it's going to be income from 2024. Why? Number of years ago, the federal government switched the whole process by one, having the FAFSA come out on October 1st. And the second, they went to this process of income when the year was, because they wanted to have the most complete tax year available so that they could really get to the idea of having the information come over from the IRS for most students and parents to simplify that filing process. And so that's what happens. Now, students and parents cannot substitute 2025 income, even if they think by putting off doing the FAFSA till January. No, the FAFSA is still going to need 2024 income information. But these are what we call special circumstances, cases where maybe the family finances have changed significantly, probably not for the better, but for the worse. There's an appeal process for that too. And we'll talk about that after this section here when we talk about appeals, because that's probably the more likely one that we see the most of here at the colleges are these income related appeals. New screens. So when the information gets imported from the IRS on behalf of those who are tax filers or those who are even non-tax filers, that status comes over. There's some new screens because initially, when this first rolled out a year or so ago, when they got to this point, nobody knew, parent or student, that information was imported on their behalf. They don't see the numbers on screen. They barely knew what happened. So there are some screens indicate that the information is being imported, and there'll be confirmation of that. If they're lucky, they see the screen up there on the left about we've securely imported your information, student side and parent side separately, because students could be filers too. And so that information is in. Or on the right side, not so good, but the idea there that, maybe the data wasn't imported due to IRS issues, maybe security issues. We do know that parents and students sometimes have identity fraud issues filed with the IRS, and thus that sometimes will close the gate and the IRS will not release information into the FAFSA in order to protect them in those cases. Or in other cases, maybe where they were not filers but still worked, there'll be the ability to manually enter whatever income information is required on the FAFSA. So family size is one other item. We're going to get back to assets in just a second here. But the family size is important in helping to figure out that student aid index, because the larger the family, we know the more income and assets might be needed to support that family. The FAFSA does its best to try to calculate family size based on information it collects from the IRS and dependency status of the student to figure out how many people are in the family. The logic behind this is no different than prior years. So I got up on screen there for you, like dependent students, right out of high school. That family is, of course, the student, the parent or parents that were figured out earlier in this process. Any other dependents that might be listed on the tax return, probably of the parents. So other sons and daughters and other children in the household. And it could be others also who live with the student's parents and receive more than half their support and will continue to do so throughout the coming school year. For independent students, again, it's the student. If the student is married, their spouse. And again, any other dependents that come off of their tax returns, any children of theirs would be included in the household size. So even though it's tried to be calculated by the FAFSA, if necessary, the parents, because it shows up in the parents part of the form for dependent students, will be able to go in and correct that information accordingly to get the right number of people in the family size. So income, I'm not going to go through all the detail. They have slimmed this down in the last few years a little bit as far as what's needed, but income as much as possible comes through that IRS direct data exchange, long name there. FADDX is the short name to it all, but adjusted gross income, income from work, taxes paid, certain education credits, and certain other profits or losses from small businesses, untaxed income, a number of things like tax exempt interest income, untaxed portions of IRA distributions, certain things like that will come from the tax return or be asked for to be entered manually because not everything is easily right off of a tax return. As far as assets, slight changes since the last year, the last time we talked for those who were at the workshop last year. They simplified this a little bit. It's still the concept that it is current values as of the day of completing the FAFSA, but the three categories, some changes within those. So cash, savings, and checking as of the day of doing the FAFSA, basic cash, savings, and checking accounts. Investments, I always like to tell my parents it's the simplest thing to think is don't include retirement accounts, don't include the house you live in, your primary resident. For FAFSA purposes, neither one of those count as an asset. Everything else kind of does. So a second home, retail or commercial property, the net values of those, the net worth of those. So if there's a mortgage on it, obviously that drives down the net value. 529 plans. Been simplified, the last year or so. So if the parents have a 529 plan for the student and the student has one of their own in their own name, the value of those plans are reported as a parent asset on behalf of the student. Other plans owned for other children do not get reported on that particular student's FAFSA. Also, 529 plans that may have been opened up by a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle are not going to be reported on the student's FAFSA as an asset. Businesses. So, we went just the last few years here, it was businesses of any size, net value. We're back to the rule of businesses of 100 or more employees, the net value of those businesses. Also, what came out that we had just last year, we had family farms were included as assets, no longer on that. Investment farms still are. If a parent has an investment farm different from a family farm, that is a little different. Child support just happens to show up on the same page as assets. That's why we put that note there. And just so parents and students don't freak out if they don't get asked about assets at all, that's okay. Not all students and parents will be asked for that. And the reason is there's an income cutoff for below a certain point. Parents and students may not be asked. Also, if they meet certain means tested federal benefits eligibility, things like SSI, SNAP, TANF, WIC, Medicaid. And the big one that sometimes causes a little confusion, so we added a link down here, is if the parents and student qualify for free or reduced price lunch based on the Department of Agriculture, US Department of Agriculture standards. That's one of those means tested benefits. The problem is here in California, like some other states, we have a statewide universal school lunch program that doesn't look at those qualifiers. So if that question ever came up and the student or parent wants to check it out, they can go to that link at the bottom and they'll be able to see what those standards are. But more than likely, those parents may also be disqualifying for one of the other benefits, and it'll be up there on the screen on the FAFSA saying, did you or your parents, it's usually the parents part, will see whether or not, and they can mark accordingly. In that case, Again, they may not be asked about assets at all. So school selection, we've gotten all the numbers done. The students done all their basic demographics, they've done their income and stuff. The parents on their own have done their income and assets. The student, one of the last sections that they complete is listing all the colleges, universities that need to get the results of the FAFSA on behalf of the student. The logic and everything we've talked about in prior years for those who've done this workshop with us before, still basically the same. List up the 20 schools, no particular order. Maybe the only thing being there, list one California school in that 20, and whatever the more likely California school, put at the top of the list. The only people that see the full list, other than, of course, the U.S. Department of Education, the FAFSA processor, is the California Student Aid Commission. Schools themselves only see themselves on the list, and as far as we all know, we're all number one. So that's so we don't do any anti-competitive things. But list up to 20 schools. The student should make sure that they've got the right name to the right school. So University of California, San Diego is different than San Diego State University, is different than University of San Diego. So make sure they've got the details. It usually gives them the address and other information to help them out, but to make sure. The other thing is every UC is a different campus, is a different school for listing on the FAFSA. Same thing with every Cal State. Same thing with all 116 community colleges in California. And then, of course, outside of our state, every school, there's University of Missouri, but if the student wants to go there, they want to make sure, is it the University of Missouri Columbia, the flagship school, or the UMKC out in Kansas City, St. Louis, or Rolla? I only know those because I was out in Missouri. I know that. But making sure they've got that accordingly. Other than that, if the student has more than 20 schools, what to do? Well, make sure in those first 20, any schools that have early priority deadlines, first come, first serve money from the school, and they want the FAFSA as soon as possible, get them on the list first. Get all 20 in, get through the rest of the FAFSA and submit accordingly. Make sure the parents have submitted their part accordingly so that when it comes down to it, FAFSA gets processed. And then once the FAFSA is processed, the student gets the email notifying them that their FAFSA is fully processed. The student can come back into the FAFSA, go to this section, and then, if necessary, kick schools off, add new schools, and hit submit. In that case, it's only the student making a correction. They won't need their parent involvement at all. But as long as the school has been listed and submitted and processed on their FAFSA, the school can process them for financial aid, even if they've been kicked off the list. So how will we know what the status is? Luckily, they've made the statuses much clearer as far as when the student's working through the form and if they're let off at some spot. If they're just in the draft, they're still in the process of doing a part or in progress on it, but maybe they haven't done consent, they haven't got their FSA ID all squared away or some other issue. Action required, pretty straightforward. Something's got to get fixed. Process is the end all. The FAFSA has been put through the ringer and actually processed. Closed is something new. And the reason is in the olden days, not too long ago, if you started a FAFSA and you didn't do anything, you never finished it within like 45 to 90 days or whatever, they'd erase it from the system. They don't do that anymore. It just kind of sits out there until the last day of the FAFSA cycle, which is usually like a year and a half away. They'll close it all out because it's not processable at that time. So what happens next? So hopefully, again, process-wise, everyone gets FSA IDs first. Student starts their FAFSA. They get to the point in the FAFSA where they need parent information. They invite them as a contributor. They continue to finish the last parts of their FAFSA, like their income and listing their schools, and submit it. So the student part is done. Parents get that code, get into the FAFSA, do their portion of it, hit submit. The FAFSA folks put the pieces together, process it, send the student an email. So this is still a very student-centered process. They'll get the results. They'll be able to log into studentaid.gov. They'll be able to see their full FAFSA results, all that stuff. That's the whole idea. Get to this point here in that first bullet. Once that processed, FAFSA is ready. Students notified that their FAFSA submission summary is ready for viewing. In the old days, it used to be called that student aid report. Remember SAR, student aid report? Now it's called the FAFSA submission summary. Same idea though. Students get in an email to them, they can look at it online. Paper FAFSA submission summaries are mailed to students if really about the only way I can see this would ever happen is if a student did a paper FAFSA, didn't provide an email address, and everything was done by paper. Otherwise, as long as an email address has been provided along the way, and that would be through generally how you set up your FSAID account, they're going to get it by email. So electronic copy of all the data from the FAFSA is sent to all the colleges and universities listed on it. Also, results are sent to the California Student Aid Commission for Cal Grant consideration. And students really, they and their parents should keep copies of anything along the way that they have as far as information they may have put on the FAFSA that helps them remember where those numbers came from. So common errors and all, the good thing is if the students and parents start at the FSAID and get all that right from the get-go, it's usually pretty simplified process. Also, it's simplified as a FAFSA process by, in a sense, it's siloed off. The student does their part, the parents do their part. It doesn't have to be on the same day. But not confusing students and parents and siblings, making sure the person who's going into the FAFSA knows what role they are. Are they the student? Are they a contributor like a parent? And in the case of where siblings, where maybe it's, I'm going to make the easiest one. Triplets are all going off to college, all three kids. Um, those three students are going to start separate FAFSAs. Each one will have their own FSA ID. They'll all get to that point in the FAFSA likely. They'll say they need parent information, and the parent will, in a sense, have to fill out information multiple times. It is what it is, but it is one of those things that will need to get done. But again, with more data coming straight from the IRS, the process really is kind of a little simpler. Also, do not switch child support paid with child support received, very different items there. Don't report values of retirement plans or um, family homes as assets. Again, those are not included as assets on FAFSA. 529 plans, again, that's slight simplification over the last few years. Only those plans that are owned by the parent or the student directly for the student are reported as assets, and they're only reported as assets under the parent part of the FAFSA. And again, grandma, grandpa, aunt, or uncle have set up a 529 plan. Awesome. But the value of those plans don't show up on the FAFSA as an asset. Double checking demographic information. Probably the best area here is where students and parents should work together as much as possible to make sure the student knows their social security number, their legal name that's on their social security card, making sure we got dates of birth and other things like that correct. And then the last thing about school code is, making sure that student does have the right school listed and the right number of schools listed. So, if they're looking at, again, University of San Diego versus UC San Diego, make sure the right school is getting the results. And again, there's not really a limit to how many they can send it to. We know high school seniors are the type that might be applying to multiple schools, not a problem. The same basic logic we talked about earlier, get 20 on, get it submitted, wait till the FAFSA's processed. At that point, being able to go back in, take schools off, add new schools. How to appeal for aid. So this is something, the what ifs. What if we have circumstances beyond what the FAFSA can take into account? FAFSA has a specific tax year. It wants asset information. It wants to know the household information, but it doesn't know everything else that's going on. All the types of things that could be impacting the reality, the real circumstances of the parents, changes the income and assets, recent unemployment or a dislocated worker, that's not reflected in the tax year information. Something happened in 2025, or as we get closer to the start of the 2026 semester in the fall, what if something like this happens? There's nowhere on the FAFSA to do this. And this is something like the blue box says, after submitting the FAFSA, this is where the student can discuss this with the financial aid office or offices at the schools they're applying to see if they can take into account these circumstances. We have some control. We don't have a lot of control on everything. So just because, say, a parent has a high mortgage payment or a high amount of credit card debt, there may not be a lot that we can do. But changes in income or other things, we certainly can help work on that. Nice thing is there is a free tip sheet available on we're guiding the student and parent on how to appeal for more aid. So that link at the bottom there, we do encourage you to download and share the free tip sheet with parents and students. Help guide them through that process. One last word of guidance I offer on this, especially for those high school students who might be looking at multiple colleges and universities. Maybe not starting the process with all 10 or 20, but instead take maybe the first 3 or 4 schools that they're really focused on or think they're going to get into. Contact those financial aid offices about, change the financial circumstances for the family to work through the process and form. Oftentimes, the information asked for at one school will be very similar to the information asked for at another. It just might be different formatting, but at least then at that point, the parents and student know, oh, mom and dad, we need some copies of the unemployment letter documentation or pay stubs for the school year, or maybe the tax return of 2025 to help guide the school on trying to figure out what those circumstances are, how we can plug it back into the formula, which is what we're allowed to do by federal rules, and see if it changes the overall eligibility for aid for the student. Last section here, and I see we got good Q&A rolling on through. So we're going to talk a little bit about resources and helpful tips to help you help your students and parents through the process, because it is a process and you do it every year, but after the first year feels like it gets easier, but there's always little things that come up. Completing the FAFSA before the March 2nd deadline for Cal Grant consideration. Really, students and parents should be completing the FAFSA as soon as possible in October. Even if they don't know exactly which schools they're going to apply to, even if they haven't applied for admissions yet, they can still be listing schools on the FAFSA. That data is going to be sent to schools. And like in my school, I get results of FAFSA a lot of times for students who never show up. Not a problem. We don't do anything with it other than I think we send an email back to the student to say, hey, we got your FAFSA results, but it doesn't look like you applied for admissions. If you're still interested, here's our process at the school. But getting those schools on, getting that form done sooner. Applying regardless of income and assets. So, sometimes parents are concerned that, what if that form says that I have to give them, support? No, it doesn't. The FAFSA does not in any way obligate parents to support a student through school. It doesn't obligate them to take a parent loan. Even the results of a FAFSA doesn't obligate a student to take a student loan. But at the very minimum, we're going to find out if the student qualifies for any grant money. And more than likely, most students who get the grants take the grant money, which is good. But at least it's a starting point to knowing yes or no. And in some cases, it's also the starting point in case we have those special circumstances, those changes in income that aren't accounted for on the FAFSA. We need square one. We need the FAFSA results first before we can do any kind of income related appeals. Big thing, list at least one college in California, even if the student plans to only attend out of state. And the reason for that is on the FAFSA in those 20 schools, at least then the Student Aid Commission knows the student is potentially going to be attending school in California, and the Student Aid Commission can run them through the cycle to see if they're going to be Cal Grant eligible. And then, of course, we can make updates along the way. Keeping copies of all documentation, confirmation pages, what the student gets, confirming once they've submitted their part and such. FAFSA submission summaries, the full summary of the FAFSA after being completed and processed. Keeping copies of all those along the way. For Student Aid Commission, students will need to set up a Web Grants for Students account so that they can track and keep track of their Cal Grant eligibility. This is big and key because it is separate from Pell Grant. If the school's been listed on a FAFSA, they get the results, can be processing the student, assuming they get admitted and they enroll, etc. For Cal Grant, again, the student may have listed a number of schools on their FAFSA to get the results. They want to make sure that it's linked to the right school. Student Aid Commission and their web grant site, a little different for students, but it's something the student wants to set up about 10 days or so after they've completed and submitted their FAFSA. And for students and parents, keep reminding them, check their emails. Check that junk folder, that spam folder. For whatever reason, FSA, Federal Student Aid, the folks who handle the FAFSA, some of those things just slip away into there. They want to make sure they're staying on top of the process. For federal student aid assistance, there's some direct contacts through studentaid.gov to answers to common questions about the FAFSA process at the first link. For the Federal Student Aid Information Center, the 1-800-4-FED-AID numbers, we think of it. If they want to know more about how to get in contact with Federal Student Aid, use the link right below the phone number. Just so you know, they are available Monday through Fridays right now from 5 a.m. to 7 p.m. our time here in Pacific time, and Saturdays currently 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. We've been told that they may cut those Saturday hours, but we don't have a date on when that might occur. But right now we do have Saturday hours when they can call if they need assistance. Tips on the FSAID process available through that studentaidpolicy.com site and link to a PDF to kind of help parents and students through that. We know that sometimes it's that first step to getting that set up that's still kind of a little ornery there. Federal Student Aid has what they call the Financial Aid Toolkit. It's a website that has a number of resources, things like pre-made emails and social media posts, some information to put into newsletter articles for counselors and such. So check that out. Great website, great resource overall. Also, just resources like this PowerPoint in PDF format and other things are being posted out to the Student Aid Commission's website, where we have additional resources, at csac.ca.gov, and then it's /post/resources. You'll see that link, I'm sure, somewhere in the next couple hours on the Student Aid Commission slides. Just want to throw that out there. If you found how to register for this event, you probably would find the same area where we have a number of resources like this and other tip sheets all available for you. Resources available for families and counselors and others. The National College Attainment Network, although it's a membership organization, has a lot of resources out there for all of us. But in particular, what they did is they created a web page specifically of FAQs related to the 2026-27 FAFSA for students and parents and counselors to refer to. It does get updated, as we understand, about every week or so, every couple weeks. So new information's out there. You Aspire, similar idea. They have a lot of information about just students wanting to attend college or university, resources to help them along the way. Of course, Student Aid Commission has their Cash for College website. So if you have hosted or would like to host or assist at a Cash for College event for your students or in the area, please check out their website, find out more about the process, how you can get involved. And then NASFA. NASFA is the National Association for Student Financial Aid Administrators. They help us on the broad national basis for people like me working at the colleges. They have information specifically prepared for those mixed status families. So where we're talking a parent or parents don't have social security numbers. And again, there may be some wariness or leery, issues or concerns about going through the financial aid process to apply on behalf, do the parent part on behalf of their students. There's some real good information available there. One slide off the beaten path of federal aid, because we want to make sure that, again, for many of you, you may have students who are looking at attending some colleges that are going to ask for this extra form. So FAFSA is universal across the US, right? It's used regardless of students wanting to attend in California, across the US, even a couple foreign countries, schools in foreign countries. But there are some schools, primarily highly selective schools and such, and a few scholarship competitions that ask for what's called the College Scholarship Service, or CSS, profile form. So this form is not the FAFSA, it's not a federal form, it's a separate form. And it does ask for more information, things that the FAFSA would not ask for, like home equity, value of cars, income and assets from non-custodial parents in the case of a divorce or separation, values of retirement plans, etc. But again, this is a form being used by these particular schools to award money from the schools themselves or these outside scholarship competitions. Here in California, so Occidental College, Caltech, Stanford, USC, Santa Clara University, and all of the Claremont colleges would say to a student, do your FAFSA and do the profile. That way you're covered for federal and state aid out of the FAFSA and money from the school itself based on need from the profile form. None of the state schools basically in California use it. UC San Francisco does, but it's mostly a graduate school thing. But none of the public schools in California utilize the profile form. Outside our state, again, it's mostly highly selective schools, your Ivy League schools. I think of Washington University in St. Louis, a very selective school there. But there are a few public schools outside of our state that do use it. Arizona State University, University of Michigan, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and University of Virginia. There may be others out there too, but usually a student, if they're talking to an admissions rep at a college fair, they'll bring this up. Or if they're looking through the materials from the school or on the website, it'll tell them if they need it. But the other thing is if they go to that link at the bottom, that cssprofile.collegeboard.org, there's a list available of the schools that are utilizing the form for the 2026-27 year. Just above that, yes, it is one of the few things in financial aid that costs a little bit of money. There is a fee waiver built in, so students who qualify for the SAT fee waiver or whose parent income is $100,000 or less, it will waive those costs for them. This form comes out October 1st. They are never late. So it is something the student wants to get on top of also. I helped a few parents through this form in my lifetime, even though my school would never need it. We're a community college. And yes, it is significantly more in depth on all these numbers. So parents who may have a variety of assets and other things may need to dig a little deeper to make sure we got the right numbers to do that form. But again, do it anyways. Again, you want to cover yourself across all bases. And so remind your students and parents not to skip the form just because it's longer or to skip a school. Again, USC uses this form. And again, it helps the students then qualify for institutional type aid. So how can you all help your students? Everything you're doing right now, of course, keeping them on track, keeping them in school, keeping them academically going, keeping them motivated to apply, motivated to graduate, walk across the stage and head on out into life. But, hosting a Cash for College event is great. It helps, you promote both FAFSA and CADA assistance, helps get those students in to get questions answered by parents. Inviting students and parents together to those workshops as much as possible. It just simplifies the process because sometimes students may not know their social security number or they've got their name as far as last name, first name, and all a little out of order sometimes. You never know. But knowing that they have the right information and the support from the parents. This third bullet was something I asked to add this year to the slides, and seeing I help oversee it. I, of course, have it here. I want you to help us at the colleges hold the students accountable for their dual enrolled status. So if they're taking college classes, making sure that they're able to account and have the time necessary to be successful both in high school and college. And the reason for that is if they fail, if they withdraw, it's part of their college record. So unfortunately, every year I always have a few students who attended some of our local high schools, were dual enrolled, didn't do very well in the college classes, and they come here their first semester, they may get aid, but they're automatically on warning status for financial aid, and they get disqualified in the middle of their first year. Why? Because we have to account for the grades and their completion of those college classes, so it can hurt them down the line. Making sure that they're making best use of that if they are dual enrolled. Beyond that, asking your local college or university financial aid offices if they have people to help out at your events, come out to a Cash for College event or host something, or sometimes looking for those bigger events across your area where they can be sent to. But, checking in with people who do financial aid all the time. And in my life, it feels like I do financial aid all the time. So there you go. Staying connected with good resources, Student Aid Commission, their website where they have resources for high school counselors and such. Federal student aid, financial aid toolkit right down below that, and other things that can be obtained from them, and other good resources for financial aid. Big one there is that last bullet, using the financial aid toolkit, where again, there's a lot of sample things made up. The social media of the federal student aid people is really good. So they have a YouTube page. I assume they still have Instagram and some of those other types of things, but they roll things out throughout the year, generally very timely. So as we get closer to October 1st, there'll be a big push about the FAFSA coming out. When we get later into the year, like around May and June and all, where students may be graduating and finishing up, there'll be a lot more information about student loan repayment if you're not coming back to school, or planning accordingly if you're going to grad school, and the differences of aid. So they have a variety of great sample posts ready for you to go and put out on your high school sites and all for your students and parents. Q&A, hopefully the Q&A looks like it's going well. I see we just have the last few questions there that are up and running. I'm gonna throw out there if Luann, my good friend there who says she retired from financial aid, but you can't prove it. Luann, as you saw, thank you first of all for answering questions. Thank everyone on the board here that's been answering questions along the way. Luann, is there any question or questions you think we should cover live here on the radio while we have people?
Well, I had a couple, Dennis. One, and again, I think CSAC folks were answering it that the PDF for the presentation should have been in the confirmation email. But if for some reason they can't find it or don't have it, John or Victoria or somebody, how would they get a copy of it?
They just need to email us, and we're happy to send them a copy. So we'll put that training email back in the chat.
Thank
If
you.
yeah, and there's other materials that we are going to send out. Some of those are still being compiled, but yeah, we'll get you a copy.
Okay.
If you
And the other question, when maybe you guys know the answer to this, I did not. Cal Kids, how is that reported, or is it reported on the FAFSA? Yeah, that's kind of what I thought.
I don't know.
Dennis,
I
it
don't
is
know.
not reported on the FAFSA.
Thank you,
Okay, thank you,
David.
David
I
Levy,
didn't think
expert
so.
on
I just
financial aid.
read a little bit about it and I'm like, this is not part of, this is something different. Okay. And then
Okay.
the other thing, John, can you put a copy of the 2627 FAFSA PDF on your resource page? I went to find it on the FSA page, couldn't find it, but we have copies of it, so it's somewhere.
Yeah, we can do that.
Great, thank you.
All right, thank you, Luann. No other big ones
I
out
don't
there.
know,
I
ask
saw the thing.
maybe David and Thalassa might have some.
Yeah.
A lot of concerns about, Homeland Security accessing the information, which again, we don't know what will happen in the future.
Correct.
There's a privacy clause on the FAFSA that's out there.
Mhm.
And about parents without social security numbers out of the country. I think that's
Yeah.
just always going to be a challenge each year because if I'm not mistaken, they're not supposed to do a paper PDF form anymore, correct?
As much as possible, just because of processing times and other things like that, we certainly could see some issues. Um,
David?
David, let me go to David. I saw your hand up.
Just a reminder that the gender sex question has been revised. The student is now given two options, male or female. Those are their only two choices. They also used to have a response that said, do not wish to disclose or do not want to answer the question, or non-binary. That response has disappeared it's disappeared on the FAFSA as of now, and it's also disappeared for 26-27.
Yeah, and to keep in mind those questions that when they do come up on the FAFSA, they're not part of the aid calculation eligibility stuff. They're more survey related questions from FAFSA. So they added that just in the last year or so for those who hadn't seen that before. That's just whatever they want to call it, statistical purposes only. It's not part of the student aid index calculation.
There's also a question here, Dennis, about full-time being 15 units now instead of 12. To be a full-time student, the student does need to enroll, depends on the school. 12 units is considered full-time, but if a student only takes 12 units a term, they're not going to graduate on time. For example, if they
That's
only
true.
take 12 units a term at a 4-year college, it's going to take them more than 4 years to graduate. So
Exactly.
we always recommend they take 15 units a term.
Yeah, I think where they're hearing that from, I'm sure as before that big bill or whatever that passed in the summer, the OBBBA passed in the summer, there was a lot of things put out there. And so one of the things that was put out there one time was to redefine full-time as 15 units for Pell Grant purposes. That did not get into the bill. So we do not have to worry about that part. But yeah, David is right. If you only take 12, you're going to take 5 years instead of really the 4-year standard, unless you really want to be at college, at a real beautiful college somewhere on an ocean or something, then, that's up to you and your parents. But yeah, as far as that goes, 12 units, in a regular semester is full-time for Pell Grant.
Dennis, there's
Okay.
John. Oh,
there-
sorry,
Hey
hold
guys,
on, David.
I'm gonna jump in and break
Yeah.
up this financial aid bromance that we have. I'm kidding. So listen, we need to take a break at this point, Dennis, to stay
Mhm.
on time. So why don't we do that? Why don't we come back at 9:47? Everyone take a 5-minute break and we will be back in 5 minutes. Dennis, thanks so much as always. You're the GOAT when it comes to these presentations. Thanks to everyone who answered the 122 plus questions. Excellent job. We appreciate everyone being here, David and Luann and all you guys. So we're gonna give you guys a 5-minute break and we will be back in 5 minutes. Thank you. On and do your thing.
Thanks, John. I will promise to go over the most interesting things. Good morning, everyone. I'm Joanne Doe. I'm the Senior Director of Engagement and Implementation from the California College Guidance Initiative. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about our free financial aid resources and tools that are available on the platform. So first, if you're not already familiar with californiacolleges.edu, it is the state's official college and career planning platform, and it is free to all students in California. Like John was saying, that there's a difference between californiacolleges.edu and the California College Guidance Initiative. The platform californiacolleges.edu is managed by CCGI, which is the team of people who works to bring this tool into the hands of students and educators throughout the state. So one of the things I really wanted to talk to you all about is the importance of launching from californiacolleges.edu. What makes our platform unique is that we have application integrations with the CCC Apply, Cal State Apply, UC application, and the California Dream Act application, as well as the FAFSA. So, as the state's preferred starting point for this California's financial aid and college applications, when students launch from the platform, you know that they're starting from a place that you trust. So they're not just typing things into a search bar that might take them to weird sites where they could be putting in possibly very sensitive information. So the links to all the applications are super easy to get to once students log in, and it will take them directly to the application. When students launch, they can also track all of these applications in one place when they log into their accounts. And then for students who are completing the CSU or UC application from our partner districts, they are able to benefit from our course migration. So any of those green verified courses are directly transferred into their applications so that they don't need to manually input in every course into their Cal State and UC application, which is such a time saver if you've ever helped a student with their applications, and also really helps to mitigate any manual entry errors, which a teenager would definitely do. So it's a really great advantage for students to use their course import. As it goes into our financial aid tools specifically, I just wanted to highlight our financial aid lessons, which help students learn about the financial aid process and what financial aid is as early as 6th grade. And also, our 11th grade lessons are the state's free resource for meeting the requirements of AB 2015, which asks that all LEAs ensure that 11th grade students get financial aid instruction before 12th grade. I already talked to you about our application integration with the FAFSA or CADA. And then when students use our either our financial aid lessons or launch through the platform and are tracking their application through there, not only are they able to track their financial aid application statuses on the platform, but educators have access to reports where they can track both student progress in their application as well as the financial aid lesson. So if that's something that you want all students to have as a tier 1 resource, for instance, or you go out into the classroom and you want to make sure that students are starting their application, you could also run the report to see that they actually have, and then to track their application status thereafter. And then lastly, the application or the report that I really wanted to share with all of you, which is already available, is the all-in-one eligibility and application statuses report, which is available to all partners. This is called the download only current college eligibility and application statuses report. Very easy to remember, but at least when you go to click on it, you know exactly what's in it. Here's a screenshot of some columns that we've cleaned up a little bit already. You'll see that it shows students individual, well, it shows data at the individual student level. So you'll get identifying information about individual students, and then you'll also see that it pulls in CSU GPA, UC GPA, CSU and UC eligibility, and then the completed and application status for the CCC, CSU, UC, and then their FAFSA or CADA. So what's really great about this application report is that it's can be really helpful for you to identify student groups where you might want to provide a little bit more targeted intervention, especially if, as you're helping students get financial aid support, you know that there are organizations that might be helping, or when it's really all hands on deck, some students might be getting something and you're not always sure who's getting what. So this is a great data-informed way for you to identify first maybe which students have completed a UC or CSU application that needs to meet that priority deadline, and then figuring out a way for those students to complete their financial aid, get the support to complete their financial aid application first. And especially as you're planning the entire application season, you might look to see which students are eligible, on track, or maybe GPA is another factor you want to take into consideration into your filters. We also have race and ethnicity filters that you can use, and you can just use those different filters to identify, this is what I want to go first, this is what I want to do second, and then start pulling in those students to ensure that they get the support that they need and the follow-up that they need. So that report is already currently available, and you can just log into your educator accounts to be able to use that right now. But I also really encourage any of you to attend one of our webinars to learn about our tools more in depth. So I will put all these links into the chat. But you can go and get a real-time facilitator to answer any questions live. If more self-guided learning is your jam, you can also visit our resource hub and go through all of the materials there, including step-by-step tutorials. And then lastly, I'll put a link for you to just reach out to us directly, and one of our staff members will be able to respond to you as quickly as they can. I'm going to stay on a little bit to answer the questions in the Q&A since it's just me, but I promised John that I would go quickly, and I hope that I did. So thank you so much for this time, and I will be answering questions in the chat, and I look forward to seeing you all around at the different conferences this season.
Okay, thank you so much. You did great. I had my stopwatch out. I had an egg timer. I was looking at no, you're fine.
I knew you
So
would be, John. I knew you
I
would
know.
be.
So thank you. We're gonna continue on with, I'm gonna share my screen, and we're gonna just jump right into the CSAC portion. Okay, so if someone can indicate if my screen is okay, that would be great. Let me do a little maneuver here. Oh, lots of thumbs up. Wow. I feel so validated. Okay, so my name is John Waldrop. I am a member of the training team here at CSAC. And I'm going to continue on with this next section. Hey, I just wanted to say, I don't know what's going on, but like this morning, there was like 75 people all queued up 30, 45 minutes before we even started. So I'm wondering if they got to 8:30 and they said, wait a minute, this isn't to buy Taylor Swift tickets. What am I doing? This is, oh man, I wasted all that time. Anyway, thanks to the eager beavers. We appreciate it. All right, so I'm going to lose my video because I find it a little distracting, especially since I'm looking at a screen over here. No one wants to watch that for an hour. I want to remind you that if you have questions, please use the Q&A as opposed to the chat. The problem with the chat is once it scrolls up, we don't see it. And the other thing is we will be compiling the Q&A questions and answers after we sort of go through and clean things up a little bit. We will be sending that out to you. So we want to make sure that all the questions end up in the actual Q&A. There you go. Public service announcement number 1 for today. I'm going to lose my video. There we go. I think we're good. Let's do this. So welcome again to this virtual statewide financial aid workshop from CSAC. I wanted to mention that CSAC now is very invested in what we're calling our Student Success Blueprint. And this is really to provide access, support, success, and equity to students. Now, if you want to read more about that, we have information on our website. Like I said, primarily, we want to make sure that in everything we do, we're putting the student first. So we have lots of information on our website about this. You're welcome to take a look. I did want to thank some folks, the CASFA and CISFA members who were on this morning answering questions like crazy. We had something like 20 questions. So these are the organizations that represent financial aid administrators. I also want to thank our resource partners, for example, Joanne from californiacolleges.edu. If you go to any of our in-person events, you're going to see that we've invited resource partners to come and to table. And sometimes we'll have as many as 3 or 4 there. So we often have Cal Kids, we have CCGI there, californiacolleges.edu, and a host of other people. So it makes it really interesting for you to engage with these organizations. And just thank you again for you guys being here today. We know this is a lot. We know it's a long day. We're going to do our best to get you through it. So everyone should have received the PDF copies of both PowerPoints. Some of you didn't. No worries. If you email us, we will get that information to you. We do have other resources that we are still compiling. We'll send those out as soon as they're available. We have a lot of virtual events and a lot of in-person events. If you want to sign up for another virtual event, go to that same link. You can reach out to us and on our events.com registration page. Like if you get through today and you go, God, I just want to sit through that again. That was awesome. I got 3 hours to, come on. You can sign up for September 22nd. We also have the DREAM Act application line by line live on October 22nd. So this isn't a traditional PowerPoint. This is, we're going to actually go into the application and show you exactly what it looks like. Sign up for that. As they say, seats are going fast. So sign up for that. And then anything else that you're interested in, go ahead and sign up for. Here's our agenda for today. Applying for financial aid. We're going to talk a little bit about the DREAM Act application, working with CSAC, primarily for high schools, but anyone who works with that cohort of students who's getting ready to go off to college. And then we're going to kind of end up with GPAs, reports, matching and editing. All right, applying for financial aid. So State of California, we have 2 applications. We're going to talk about the dates and deadlines, which the last couple of years, right? Those have been sort of adjusted because the rollout of the FAFSA, the initial rollout, was such a disaster. Can I say that? It was. Let's face it. The initial rollout of the FAFSA a couple of years ago was an absolute disaster, and we had to really pivot because a lot of students were having issues. Income ceiling, special circumstances, etc. Let's keep going. How many times can we watch this GIF? That's great. All right. California has two applications. Obviously, the FAFSA, that's the federal application. And then we have the CADA. Some people say CADA. We don't care. Just don't call it potato. That would be awkward. So FAFSA, CADA, California Dream Act application. And the only thing I really want to mention about this is obviously these are both just applications. They do essentially the same thing. They they're applications that you can use to apply for as much financial aid as you can get. And the FAFSA is for federal aid for U.S. citizens or permanent residents, for example. The CADA is for undocumented students and can also be used by mixed status families. And I'm going to talk about that. The one thing that we kind of ask is, let me jump up on my soapbox here for a second. If you talk about the FAFSA, if you're standing in front of students and parents, or you're sending out an email, or you're having a financial aid night, or you're doing whatever you do, and you say the word FAFSA or put it out there, really the very next thing you should say is, or the California Dream Act application, right? If you talk about one, we need to talk about both. And it's because we don't want to stigmatize an application that so many families and students are already reluctant to use. So please, you say FAFSA, just like Pavlov's dogs, like ding, 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 ding. Oh, and the CADA, the California Dream Act application. No one got the Pavlov's dogs reference. Whatever. Any psychology majors out there? All right, let's keep going. So the one thing you can say about these applications when you're talking to students, what you can say is, hey, filling out this application is literally one-stop shopping for financial aid. The vast majority of financial aid a student can receive, they're going to get via these applications, whichever one they do, whichever one is applicable to them. So if you're a FAFSA filer, obviously that would be federal aid. State aid would be for both. Institutional aid would be for both. Campus-based grants and scholarships available for both. Work study and federal student loans, obviously that's for FAFSA filers. But just remind students, they say, well, what do I get with this? Lots of things, right? One-stop shopping, fill out an application. We have two different deadlines. So this year, unless something goes horribly sideways, the application should be available on the regular date, right? So we know that October 1st is when those applications are available. We highly recommend that you fill out applications early, or that you help your students to fill out applications early. Why? Two things. Number one, there is some financial aid that really is kind of first come, first serve. There's financial aid and money available that is not unlimited. So work study, for example, other institutional aid, other programs, there's money that there's a finite amount of, and if you've applied and you're eligible, you're going to get it. The second reason, almost as important, maybe more important, is that if a student fills out an application early, right, and something goes wrong, that never happens. And there's a problem. That never happens, but it does happen. We have a lot of time to fix it, to correct it, to work with the student or the student's family, or for us to help you, the institution or the counselor or whoever you happen to be, figure out what's wrong and make a correction. If the student waits to the last minute to do an application and then we're at the deadline and we're trying to figure it out, it's going to be a long, long, long process. All right. March 2nd deadline is the priority application deadline. That means we would really like everyone to apply by March 2nd. Don't tell students March 2nd. Say, hey, it's October. Let's knock these applications out and get them out of the way. For students who are attending a community college, you have until September 2nd. And again, I don't want to, I think it's a little, you have to be a little bit careful about throwing September 2nd out there, because students will automatically think, oh, that's the date for everyone, whatever. Really what I like to do is say everyone March 2nd, but for those students who missed the March 2nd deadline, are maybe they're still contemplating whether or not they want to go to college. Have them fill out an application prior to September 2nd. Look, fill it out. You still have time. You're going to get an idea of how much money you can get. And then hopefully you can end up at a community college and you can start, your education, your higher education that way. There are income and asset ceilings for Cal grants. Now, this is specifically for Cal grants, right? Cal grant is just one type of financial aid from the state. So as you can see here, the income and assets, the income is based on the type of Cal grant. So we have A, B, and C, and the family size. And you can see there's a pretty big gap, a pretty big difference between the lower Cal Grant B amounts and the higher Cal Grant A amounts. And so that's important. I'm going to talk to you in a second about why that's important. Also, there are assets, right? So assets are a thing in California. Assets can really be make it challenging for some families to get as much financial aid as they would probably like to get. If you own a second home, that's an income property. Maybe you own a place and it's an Airbnb. Well, that's an asset, and that automatically, anything in California, if you have a tough shed in your backyard, that's worth millions of dollars in California. So I'm joking. It's not worth that much, but you get the idea. So you can get dinged on the asset part, but we're not going to focus on that. Let's look at the incomes. So this gives you an idea about what you can qualify for based on the program and the family size. There's another component, FYI, the GPA. To get any Cal Grant, well, let's talk about B. To get a Cal Grant B, you have to have a minimum GPA of 2.0. To get a Cal Grant A, you have to have a minimum GPA of 3.0. So there's a difference. Cal Grant C doesn't require a GPA, and we'll talk about that in a second. So let's take a look at this. Here's basically this. We have this thing called the no Cal Grant zone. It's not really a thing. We kind of made it up. And what we found is that a lot of students are really caught in no man's land here, right? They have a GPA that would qualify for a Cal Grant B, but the income is over for a Cal Grant A. So I'm going to give you an example of that. And this happens to thousands of students. Why is that important? It's important because we need you to share this information early on, especially if you work at a high school, with your high school students. A lot of times students don't get financial aid because of one class, that impacts their GPA. So here we have a student. This is Richard. Richard, what's going on? Nice backpack. So Richard has a family size of 5. This is the example that we're using. Richard's family income, excuse me, is $97,000. Okay, so if we look at this, we go 97,000. Okay, we see where we're at. And Richard has a 2.87 Cal Grant GPA. In other words, that's the GPA calculation that the school uploaded or the district uploaded for the student. So when you look at all this information, the question is, will Richard get a Cal Grant? Unfortunately, the answer is no. Why? Even though he has a good GPA, it's not a 3.0 GPA. That means that the income is too high to get a Cal Grant B, and the GPA is too low to get a Cal Grant A. So he is really in this no Cal Grant zone. And I have to tell you, we talk to these students all the time, and they go, I didn't realize that was a thing. It's a thing. Sophomore and junior year, those GPAs really matter. And sometimes, if Richard was going to go to a UC, he's leaving what, $14,000 plus on the table because he hated sophomore Spanish or whatever class it was that he didn't do as well in as he may have been able to. So this is why we need to make sure parents and students understand that this exists. All right, Cal Grant programs. I'm not going to read all of this and go through all of this, but it's kind of helpful to know, and it's kind of interesting. So you'll notice that we put what we call these internally. So the Cal Grant High School entitlement is the E1, we have E2, E3, etc. And for most of you, you're focused on the high school entitlement students, right? If you work at a high school. it's actually the easiest time you can get a Cal Grant, the year you graduate from high school and the following year, if you didn't end up going to school. We have other types of Cal Grants. We'll talk about those a little bit. We don't need to go through the whole list. We just want to show you, and you should have this right on the PDF so you can take a look at it. We also have competitive awards. So we basically have entitlement and competitive. What's the difference? The difference is a entitlement award means if you meet the criteria, if you meet the basic criteria, you're going to get a Cal Grant, right? There's no limit to the number of Cal Grants. There's no limit that the state puts on the dollar amount of how much we can give out in Cal Grants. If you're eligible, you get a Cal Grant. That's the entitlement. And that's typically what we see students coming out of high schools, students who are transferring from a community college to a four-year who never had a Cal Grant, they could be eligible. Students who go back to a community college, they could be eligible. But for all the students who don't meet the criteria or who are not eligible, they kind of get dumped into this competitive pool. And it's exactly how it sounds. It's competitive. There's a scoring matrix, and not that many students can get an award. It's limited to 13,000. And sometimes there's, I don't know, 100, 150,000 potential eligible students. So you can see the math isn't great for that particular cohort. We also have the Cal Grant C, primarily for students who are interested in a vocational, occupational, technical type program. No GPA requirement for this. They just have to apply by the deadline. Then we have students with dependents. Students with dependents is for students who have dependent children under the age of 18 to whom they're supporting 50% or more. In other words, it's a parent with kids who's going to school or going back to school. They can get a greatly increased access award and they can get up to $6,000 if they're a full-time student and they have enough financial need. So, hey, these kids are finally, you can get a return on investment with your kids. Oh man, all right, good to know. These are the maximum yearly Cal Grant award amounts. It's based on the Cal Grant and then the type of institution. I'm not going to go through this whole thing. You can see that the numbers vary a great deal. Why do they vary? Well, because it costs less to go to a community college than it does a CSU, and less to go to a CSU than it does a UC. And then we have private schools on there as well. So that's why there's this variation, right? Previously, if you had a Cal Grant A and you went to a community college, you had a Cal Grant, but you didn't get paid. You had to wait until you jumped to a four-year, assuming that's what you wanted to do. That's not necessarily accurate anymore. There are some foster programs for kids where they could actually get a Cal Grant at a community college with a Cal Grant A. Also, students with dependents, I just mentioned, if they have a Cal Grant A, they could also get paid at a community college. So things are changing. Anyway, this will give you a rough idea of the current maximum yearly Cal Grant award amounts. All right, just a reminder, continue to ask your questions. They're free. Actually, today they're ask one, get one free. So take advantage of this special offer. Okay, middle class scholarship. Middle class scholarship is for students who may not qualify for a regular Cal Grant because the income is over. So in particular, we're talking about someone who missed qualifying for Cal Grant A, or who's kind of right there on the bubble. So middle class scholarship is for the higher income students, for students with income up to $250,000. If you go onto our website, you can see the income and asset ceilings. The one great thing that's happened with middle class scholarship that has changed is the award is based on the student's cost of attendance, right? And it'll take into consideration the other aid, gift aid that they're receiving. There's an exception for foster youth, and you can get this for up to 4 years. Now, you do have to apply every year, just like you have to do your FAFSA or your CADA every year. You have to apply every year. You don't have to do any special applications. You fill out the application by the March 2nd deadline. And if you're not eligible for Cal Grant, you'll automatically be considered for middle class scholarship. Now, that's not even exactly true, because we're seeing students this year who actually qualify for both. They're, right there in a place with their income and their financial need where they're getting a Cal Grant and then maybe a small middle class scholarship, or they're getting a large middle class scholarship and maybe some Cal Grant. My daughter, who started at Sac State this year, Sacramento State, CSU, is getting a small middle class scholarship. It's not a lot, but it helps, right? So the program is, I think, much improved. Still have funding for it, et cetera. If you have any questions, go to our website and we will give you more information. Dual enrollment. Dual enrollment, dual enrollment. I think dual enrollment is fantastic, and we're seeing more and more of it in the state of California. Lots of schools, high schools, and high school districts have some sort of consortium agreement with their local community college or their local community college district, allowing high school students to take college level coursework while they're still in high school. What's the advantage of that? Well, one, it makes it a lot cheaper to take college level coursework. Two, it primes the pump for those students so they're ready to jump to college. And the statistics show that the students who are earning college credit while in high school are much more likely to go to the college and to stay in the college, right? So it's a really positive program, and the programs are different all over the state. That's the one thing. Um, there are programs where you can actually graduate from high school with both a high school diploma and an associate's degree, which is kind of crazy, but true. Um, but there's different programs. Now, most students who are doing this program they don't earn enough college credit for it to be impactful in any negative way. But I do want to point out a couple things. The students who are taking the college level coursework while they're in high school, they have to maintain and get good grades in that college coursework. Why? Because when they ultimately jump and start at the community college, this community college is going to look at those grades, and if those grades are not good, they could actually start community college on academic probation. So this is a conversation you need to have with these students. If they're not suited for doing it, or they're really struggling, they may want to withdraw from a couple of those classes, because they don't want to take a bunch of classes and then either not do them or fail them, because then they end up on academic probation, potentially when they start at the community college. Does that happen a lot? No, it doesn't. Could it happen? Yeah, it's a thing. So you want to make sure your students know. The other thing is, depending on how many units they earn, there's a slight chance it could be impactful for their education level when they start at the community college. What does that mean? So if a student is taking a lot of these community college classes and passing them, and those classes are all viable for whatever it is they're going to do at the community college, they could potentially jump to the community college and already be considered a sophomore, for example. On one hand, that's great. That's 1 year of community college that they don't have to pay for. On the other hand, they're only going to have 3 years of Cal Grant eligibility left, if that's the case, because Cal Grant eligibility is based on your education level at any given time. So I don't want anyone to freak out. No reason to freak. You can freak out. Look, I'm not judging, but I don't think you should freak out. I'm just sort of pointing out a couple of the things with dual enrollment that you may not have been aware of. Programs for foster youth. There are several of these. Boy, foster youth, when you look at the numbers, this is the group of students who, I mean, let's be honest, who really struggle to navigate financial aid to begin with, graduate from high school, start at the college, stay in the college, graduate from the college. And I think, obviously, foster youth a lot of times don't have the support that other students may have. So there's a lot of reasons. But because of this, there's a lot of new legislation around financial aid and assistance for foster youth to help them at least be able to pay for college. That's a huge component of it. So we have Cal Grant B for foster youth Access Award. We have the Chafee Grant for foster youth. So that's not really a CSAC program per se, but we help administer that program in the state. And then foster youth can also get middle class scholarship if they qualify. If you want information about these programs, feel free to visit our website, and we have a whole section about foster youth and the foster youth programs. Students may not be interested in taking, and going to school for 4 years and getting a bachelor's degree, for example. Some students are more interested in joining the workforce, in learning a skill and learning a craft. And so some students are better suited to go to a, vocational, occupational, or technical school to study in those types of programs. The good news is, there's some compelling reasons to do this, right? So, I mean, let's face it, not every student is interested or built for a 4-year academic experience. We would love it if all students, went to college and navigated that and, finished with a degree. But that's not for us, all students. So if you have a student who says, I'm not really sure, I know that I want to work in, culinary arts, for example, you want to work in culinary arts. Okay, well, there's lots of programs at different community colleges for culinary arts. You know where they have a good one? Dennis this morning is the financial aid director at LA Mission College. They have a fantastic culinary arts program and very successful. And those students go through that program, and then they're able to go out and typically find a job right away in that field because there's demand. So tell students that, if they're interested in this, the community colleges is where I would start. There are so many different programs, it's unbelievable. If you go into the community college chancellor's website, you can go through and search the different programs. But there's everything. Every time I look at that list, I see something that I've never even heard of. So it's amazing the programs that are out there. The other thing that you may or may not know about is that many community colleges are now offering bachelor degree programs. What? It's true. They're now offering bachelor degree programs. In other words, a student could start at that community college and then and continue at that community college if they wanted to get a bachelor's degree in the particular program that the community college has. There's a list of campuses here on the right. It shows you their bachelor degree program. Most community colleges that have this typically only have one. Some of them have more than one, 2 or 3, and more added all the time. So there's a lot of new programs coming on. And normally these are programs, they've really thought about this. These are bachelor degree programs in areas where there is a high need for this kind of training, right? And this kind of education. So it's typically not offered locally at the CSU or the UC, which is another good reason to stay. And actually, it's cheaper to go to the community college for the bachelor's degree. This is really interesting to me. It's growing all the time, and more students are doing it. So if you're not familiar with it, I would definitely check it out. Connect with your local community college and ask them if they have this type of program. There's lots of them out there. There are other sources of financial aid. So we have students who are, getting financial aid, but they're not getting quite enough to cover their expenses. Very common, right? So to bridge the gap, sometimes students have to work part-time. That's normal. I think, when I went to college, I worked full-time, as opposed to most students who can work part-time now. But you can tell them if they're going to work, try to work someplace that offers tuition assistance or tuition reimbursement. What is that? A lot of places, including fast food places, other places, Starbucks, Chipotle, McDonald's, they have tuition assistance or tuition reimbursement programs. Now, every program is different based on the company. You should check on the website and see what the requirements are. But in California, a part-time employee can get up to $5,200 and plus in tax-free tuition reimbursement or assistance. So if you have to work, hey, work for a company that's going to help you pay for college. Also, don't overlook that there are lots of merit scholarships, other scholarships out there. Go on to websites like FastWeb, scholarships.com, or even the college website, the financial aid part, and you'll be able to find lots of different programs that might be, or lots of different scholarships that you can apply for that you may be eligible for. Okay, all right, we're gonna take a really quick 5-minute break. We're gonna come back at 10:31 and we're gonna continue. Please continue to ask your questions, use the Q&A, hang in there. We're getting through it. We'll see you in 5 minutes, all right? 10:31, thank you. All right, here we go. We're gonna talk just really briefly about the California Dream Act application or the CADA. And I just want to point out that, you know, as much as is possible, the California Dream Act application information is private and secure. That means that, you know, we don't share this information with anyone other than the schools or for financial aid purposes. In the 10, almost 11 years working at CSAC, I've never seen this application cause anyone any kind of problems. So the bottom line is it's as safe as secure as we are able to make it. And we have all the safeguards in place to make sure that information is safe. Okay, so what is the California Dream Act application or the CADA? Hey, if you say CADA, I'm not going to judge. CADA. So the CADA is an alternative to the FAFSA. It's administered by CSAC. The good news about that is because it's our program that we administer, if you're having a problem with a student who's filling out the CADA, we can quite easily fix it. Most of the time we can get in and see the whole application. It's not like if someone calls us about the FAFSA, we don't have access, you know, to federal student aid and the FAFSA, but we do have access, complete access to the CADA. So the CADA is for undocumented students who meet AB 540 requirements, right? Asylum seekers with a pending case. So in other words, if someone is seeking asylum status or refugee status, but their case is pending, they could be eligible to fill out the CADA. U visa holders are students with TPS, temporary protected status. CADA is also, this is important, for students who are from mixed status families who choose not to complete the FAFSA or who are maybe just having problems completing the FAFSA. I'm going to talk about this in more detail. CADA is an application for state and institutional aid and several other programs, but not for federal aid, like we mentioned previously. And the deadlines for CADA are exactly the same as the deadlines for FAFSA. So it's applicable across the board. Reminder that on October 22nd, if you haven't signed up, we're going to have the CADA virtual line by line. It's going to be fun. It's going to be really, get your friends, gather around the computer, grab some popcorn. We're going to do this. And so we're actually going to go into the application and we're going to go through it line by line. And I think if you help students with this application or you have undocumented students that you're just trying to help get through the process, please be there on October 22nd. It's going to be really good for you to go through and see exactly what the student sees. Sign up for that. There's the link below. Same link that you went to sign up for this. Dream Act application. So it's not a lot of changes this year. The one thing that we did change is that we brought back the 3 separate sections. Before we had login and then parent signature, and then we had a teeny tiny little line at the very bottom for people who were going to register for the first time. And it was like, where's Waldo? It was impossible to find on the homepage. And, you know, it's like they said, what's the smallest font we can legally use? Oh, Comic Sans 4. Perfect. Let's use that. Stick it in the corner. So I think maybe because I complained so much, it wasn't me, that they said, okay, let's put that back on there. And now you have the register, which would be for new students, first-time students who are doing this. Log in if you've already completed the registration process or you have an account, and then sign. If the parents didn't sign initially, they can come back in and sign. So AB 540 requirements. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail about this, but there are some different pathways that students can take to be eligible to receive in-state tuition, right? So they're not paying the, you know, sort of outrageous international student rate or out-of-student rate. And they just have to meet the criteria of 3 years in high school with 3 years of high school credits. That's number one. If you have a student who has been in a high school or your high school for 3 years or 4 years, they should be good to go. Excuse me. I said high school and I got all choked up. So I had a flashback. Mom, a D is passing. Come on. All right. So if they don't have the 3 physical years in the high school, that means that they could potentially make up the difference by having attended a elementary school or middle school. There's not a lot of times where this really happens, but it could happen. So if a wonder kid did 3 years worth of high school credits, but they weren't physically in the high school for 3 years, if they were in a middle school or elementary school for a corresponding amount of time, that could work. Uh, if they have graduated from California high school, um, you know, and they had the equivalent of an AA from a community college, that meets the requirements. So anyway, there's a lot of different pathways for this to happen. Here's the one takeaway from this. You never want to tell a student you're never going to be AB 540 eligible, because that's simply not true. CADA for mixed status families. We're seeing an increase in students who are using this um, uh, for their mixed status families. What is a mixed status family? So this is when the student is eligible to fill out the FAFSA because the student was born in the United States, for example, they're a US citizen or they're a permanent resident. So they could do the FAFSA, but they're choosing not to do it, maybe because their parent or parents are undocumented, for example. Now, families are all different, situations are all different, circumstances are all different, and but this is just an option for students who don't necessarily want to fill out the FAFSA, even though they had the ability to do so. So here's who can fill out the CADA. Undocumented students, obviously. DACA recipients. It's not really that much of a thing anymore since new DACAs haven't been handed out for quite a while. Students with a U visa, students with TPS, US citizens or non-citizens whose parents or spouse, if they're independent students, are undocumented. All right, so hopefully this explains it. Again, here's a really important thing. The student and the family has to decide if this is the pathway they want to take. If they are concerned about what's happening now and they don't want to necessarily put out the information because they have an undocumented parent or parents, they can use the CADA. Now the disadvantage obviously is that they're not going to get as much money probably because they're not going to get federal aid. And here's just we kind of went over some of these. So what's the advantage of completing the CADA? I apologize if you can hear the gardeners who are in my complex and apparently mowing the pavement in front of my door, because that's what it sounds like. All right, so the CADA is an application maintained by CSAC, and like I said previously, the information is not shared. So that might be an advantage of filling out the CADA. It's safer. What if a student already has completed a FAFSA? So you want to talk to your students early on, because if they complete a FAFSA for a specific academic year, at that point, they can't go back and say, oh, I think I want to do the CADA. So right now, that's not an option. What if I choose to complete the FAFSA process as a member of mixed status family? Then you're going to have to provide all that information, right? So that means that your contributor or contributors, typically your parents, would have to create an FSA account, and they're going to indicate they don't have a social. Can I complete the FAFSA at a later date? Yes, absolutely. One of the advantages of doing CADA for mixed status is that the student always has the option to go back and complete the FAFSA at a later date. And even if that date is past the deadline, we're still going to consider that an on-time application. Why? Because they did their CADA on time. Okay, so account registration, here's where you register. This is the information you see. Now, there's two different pathways as you're filling this out. If you're a traditional CADA student or you're a mixed status family student. So basically, this is what this looks like. Do you have a social security number? No. Do you meet AB 540? Yes. Okay, do the DREAM Act. Simple, pretty straightforward. For mixed status, do you have a social? Yes. Um, did you get it through DACA? No. Are you a US citizen or do you meet this criteria? Yes. And then you just click, I understand that I'm filling out a CADA, even though I could fill out a FAFSA. So completing the application, you're going to register just like with any website. You're going to register that information, and then you're going to, fill out your demographic information. You're going to make sure you can use a username that's available, right? So if it's available, it'll show green around the box, and you'll know you're good to go. As you complete the FAFSA, you're going to notice these giant red exclamation points. Uh, as you work and complete each section, those will turn into green check marks. So that's what we're looking for as we fill out the application. The AB 540 affidavit is an affidavit. This is only for traditional CADA filers, i.e. undocumented students. There's an affidavit that they have to do, whether it's on here or with the school. We provide it on the actual CADA application, and the school, meaning the college or the university, can choose to use that directly. Many of them are. Others are still doing their own thing, but they can fill out this information, and it's a requirement for the traditional CADA filers, and they have to indicate how they meet AB 540. So it's an affidavit that in the past was something that they would have to do with the campus. They still might have to do it with the campus depending on the college, but now we've embedded it into the California DREAM Act application. So they have to fill out those questions. They have to manually enter in the name of the school or schools that they've attended. And they also have to indicate the number of credits or hours. This would be important. If a student went to a high school for 3 or 4 years and graduated from the high school, then they're going to put the high school and the units, or the credits rather, and then they're done. Pretty straightforward. If there's a combination of adult school, right, or high school and then community college, because they haven't gotten AB 540 yet, they're going to have to indicate all those institutions with that same information. There's a very good forum on Immigrants Rising, by the way. If you're not familiar with Immigrants Rising, they have a good information around this that can help you and help the students and the families determine kind of where they are in that process. The signature part is super easy. Once it gets done, the student will check the box that says, I agree, yes, yes, yes. And then their name will populate in the signature. The parent signature is exactly the same. It's very easy. They can just, check that box as well. And then the parent name, or one of the parent names, you can decide which one, will populate into that signature panel, and you're done. So very, very easy. If a student has a parent who lives in another country, if the student is in contact with that parent and it's the biological parent or parents, then those parents have to provide financial information to put on the application. Now, we don't care about taxes abroad, and no one's going to import tax information from India in this case. I think that's, India in this case. Income and assets. So the parent would provide that, and the students would simply put that on the application. If the student is living here with an aunt or a sister or a friend or a girlfriend or a boyfriend or whatever, and they absolutely don't have contact with the parents or the biological parents, or maybe the parents are deceased, or maybe one's incarcerated, or whatever the circumstance, if they legitimately don't have contact, then the student will have to go to the financial aid office of the college they're planning to attend, or colleges, and explain their situation. And then the college is going to evaluate that situation and tell the students if they can make an adjustment, or they can make the students independent for financial aid purposes. There's something called the DREAM Act Service Incentive Grant. It is for students who complete the CADA who are Cal Grant B eligible, or they could be A or B eligible, but they have to at least be B. You do volunteer or community service and get up to $4,500 a year for 300 hours of community service. There are opportunities right on the campus where they're working as well as off campus. This is an underutilized award, so please tell your students to, if they fill out the CADA and their Cal Grant be eligible, say, hey, check in with your college when you go and ask them about this program. They can also answer yes on the CADA, if they're interested. But I recommend you're pesky and you go directly to the financial aid office. Okay, all right. We're gonna just take a really quick 3-minute break. We're gonna come back at what are we gonna come? 10:50. This is a really long process, so we're just gonna give you one more quick break before we finish off everything. We appreciate it. If you have questions, now's a good time to put them in the Q&A. We've answered over 200 questions today, which is good because we're working on a commission and, I need some work on my transmission, right? So every little bit helps. All right, we'll see you in 3 minutes. Thank you very much. 10:50.
Answer your question. So welcome back. We're going to jump into the final section, which is working with the Student Aid Commission as a high school. So we appreciate you all working in the high schools during this extremely busy season. I know that not only with the school year starting, but you have your seniors applying for universities and colleges and anxiously awaiting that October 1st date for the financial aid applications to open. So we have some best practices and tips and tricks for you to survive this application season. And just know that the Student Aid Commission is here to support you. I'm going to talk about all the resources available to you, including web grants for institutions and CSAC school support. So stay tuned. I know that this presentation is scheduled through 11:30, so I'm going to try and get us done through that time. It's likely we won't have time for live questions, so please continue asking your questions in the Q&A box. You can get answers in real time from my colleagues. So starting with a helpful checklist for the academic year, we recommend that in the month of September, you provide a demographic verification form to your current seniors. We have a template on our website for you that you can edit. You can throw your school's logo on it. But essentially, this form is going to have spaces for the student to fill in all the essential information that will accompany their GPA when you go to upload it. Their legal name, their date of birth, their address, email address, phone number, all of those things that you may not have updated. If the student entered your school as a freshman, they may have since moved or got a different phone number or even changed their name. So collecting this information before you upload GPAs is really going to make that matching process later far easier. So we recommend that you gather this information in September. Now, by law, high schools in the state of California must upload their seniors' high school GPAs by October 1st. Now, we recommend that you get in as many as possible by that date, as we will begin awarding students as early as November this year. However, the final GPA deadline for high schools to upload is March 2nd of 2026. So you do have time for any of those last minute GPAs that come in from transfer students, or if you have one that maybe was missed, you can still upload through March 2nd. But October 1st is that deadline that's technically in law, and we really encourage schools to get on that as soon as possible. Now, by January 1st, so ideally sometime before the fall semester ends, we also encourage you to notify your juniors, your class of 2027, that they may opt out of having their GPA uploaded their senior year. This is not a recommended opt-out at all, because as you all know, and as John explained very well in his first section, that you cannot receive a GPA, you cannot receive a Cal Grant without a GPA. Although students may opt out of having that GPA uploaded, and they should be notified that that is an option, we do encourage all students to have their GPA uploaded for Cal Grant eligibility. Now, throughout the spring weekly, you'll want to begin running reports and matching and editing those GPAs, which I'll talk about later. Also, assist your seniors with creating their Web Grants for Students account. I actually have a great screenshot of that account in a later slide. And by August 31st, we ask that high school counselors verify high school graduation for any leftover students that haven't already done it themselves. Don't worry, I also have a slide on that later on. Now, if you have Web Grants for Institution access, why don't you give me a thumbs up or a heart in the Zoom here? I want to know how many of you have access to Web Grants for Institutions. Good, I see a lot of thumbs up. Thank you for that, lots of hearts. So that's great, but we have over 700 folks on the line, so I imagine some of you don't already have access. This is free to your school or district, and you should already have a Web Grants system administrator. That's going to be somebody on your campus who's been established as the person who can grant access to standard users. That may be a lead counselor or a principal or someone at the district office who has that ability. If you don't already have access, you should get it. You can simply request that through your system administrator identified at your campus. With access to this database, you can determine if students have filed their FAFSA or CADA. You can easily add individual GPAs for students who started late at your school. You can also see if students' GPAs have been matched. I'm going to talk about the importance of matched GPAs in a bit. You can also edit any incorrect information if you uploaded a GPA that had an error. And then finally, you can check to see if your students have been awarded a Cal Grant. So when you get that student in late spring who's unsure if they can even go to college, you can assist them by checking their Cal Grant status on your account. One of the many features of Web Grants for Students includes the Financial Aid Application Status Report. This is an outreach tool that you can use to identify students who haven't yet submitted a FAFSA or CADA. When you run this report, it's going to list all of the students who are enrolled, listed under the CDE data. So you're going to have a long list of students there. And it's in CSV format, which means you can open it in Excel and you can easily filter any one of these categories. And so if you draw your attention to the far right column, you'll see that we have an action needed section. This is where we'll actually tell you what action is needed for each student. If you see that action needed is none, that means that the student has a financial aid application on file, they have a valid SAI, a GPA has not only been uploaded, but matched to their application. Therefore, no action is needed by you other than assisting the student with any questions they have or with that Web Grants for Students portal. Other options here are outreach to the student if they haven't yet submitted an app, or if they have submitted an application, but there's something missing, like a parent signature. We'll also advise you if you need to still upload their GPA or manually match that GPA. So this report won't become available until after the application season opens on October 1st. If you log in today and try to run this for the 25 or the 26-27 school year, you're not going to have any results yet. So just be aware that we do need those applications to be open in order for you to have results. You can get this application status report by logging into Web Grants, going under the Cal Grant banner, clicking Transfer Data, and then selecting Report Download. Joanne Doe from CCGI explained all about this all-in-one eligibility and application report. So you'll have this slide available to you to refer back to later. This is yet another helpful report for you to run in order to aid your outreach efforts. I mentioned earlier as part of your checklist for the year that high school graduation verification is required for new high school entitlement awardees. Now, it is on the student to log in to their own Web Grants for Students portal and verify once they have graduated high school. However, sometimes students will either forget or they haven't yet logged in, they're taking a long summer break, and come fall, their Cal Grant could potentially be held up if they haven't yet verified that they graduated. As a counselor, you have the ability to go in and run this list of any awarded students who haven't yet verified their graduation status. Therefore, you can help that process along and verify easily with just a click of a button. A graduated status means that the student has definitely graduated, they've met those requirements, and they are a high school diploma recipient. If you select not graduated, that should only be used if the student is definitely not expected to meet graduation requirements by December 31st of 2026. Pending means that you cannot determine graduation status because the student either transferred to another school or they're still working on meeting those graduation requirements, and it's still possible that they could make it in time. Leaving it in pending status is the best option if you simply don't know. Pending leaves it where the student would still need to go in and verify on their own if, again, they've switched schools or if they're still working on those requirements. So letting you know that this is an option for you to help your awarded students. Now, quick pivot, if you weren't aware, we have what's called the Student Ambassador Program, which is a program that you at your high school can implement on your campus. What this does is it allows students to be trained as financial aid presenters, and they can actually go into their high school classrooms and make presentations about financial aid. This is a great way to create awareness on your campus of the FAFSA, the CADA, and all the financial aid programs that are out there. We have a complete training guide that students and facilitators can use to get that program going. Students will receive a certificate that they can display, and they can include CSAC Student Ambassador on their resume and college applications. If there's one thing we've learned about presenting to high school students is that they're not always going to pay the most attention to an adult. Going into a high school, I'm old enough to be their mom. They're not always going to want to listen to that random lady from CSAC. But if you put one of their peers in front of them with the same information at a very high level, that may get them interested. So if you are interested in becoming a facilitator, scan the QR code or click the link on this slide for more information. Now, some helpful tips that I won't go through in great detail. These are some that Dennis had shared earlier during the FAFSA presentation. Just making sure that students complete their applications as soon as possible before that priority deadline. We do recommend that students add at least one California college on their application, even if they plan on studying out of state. We know that plans change or students change their mind. And if they haven't yet included a California college, we will not consider them for Cal Grant or any other state aid because we won't have their application. All the more reason for them to list at least one California college and, in my opinion, at least one California community college. Because even if their plans change, they could still be in the running for a California College Promise Grant or Pell Grant or even Cal Grant B or C if they plan to attend a community college after, again, those plans change. Again, advising students to create their Web Grants for Students account is very important, and reminding students to enable CSAC text alerts and check their email often. We send lots of notices to students about their Cal Grant eligibility and their account, so definitely encourage them to check their email. And finally, if students have a special circumstance, they really need to talk to their college financial aid office. We did the best that we could with some of your questions in the Q&A box where you were asking about a specific student at a specific school. Really, their best bet is to go to the financial aid office for those questions, especially if they have extenuating circumstances like the parents aren't in the picture, or they're unable to get the certain information. The financial aid office can help. Now, I did promise you a screenshot of Web Grants for Students. This is the portal. When a student logs in, this is the screen that they will see. On this portal, the student can confirm that their GPA was submitted for Cal Grant consideration. They can update their contact information, including their phone number, email address, and home address. They can verify their high school graduation, as I mentioned earlier. Confirm their college of attendance. I had a question in the chat earlier about a student who hadn't yet been paid their Cal Grant this fall term and why that would be. Usually 9 times out of 10, as someone who is a former financial aid coordinator at a college, I found that the majority of students who hadn't yet been paid were those that hadn't yet confirmed their college of attendance on their Web Grants for Students. When they log in and they select the appropriate academic year, they can see their school of attendance listed here. If the student lists multiple schools on their FAFSA or CADA, CSAC will take the very first one on the list and assign that school to the student. It is up to the student to confirm that they are attending that school. In this case, the student is listed as attending CSU Sacramento. However, if they were actually going to attend Sonoma State, they would need to go in here and click School Change. That will add the student to the correct school's roster, allowing that school to pay them. Students can also use this portal to place their Cal Grant on a leave of absence, if they need to place it on hold in the case that they are taking a term off from school, or they're going to, take a gap year, this would be the place to do that. Also, a new enhancement that's coming very soon, we are going to have CalKits as a section on Web Grants for Students. This is a planned enhancement for sometime later this year and will only appear on a student's portal if they have an existing CalKids account. Here, they'll be able to see that their account status is either claimed or unclaimed. They can log into their account or even contact CalKids. So this is going to be a really great enhancement to really drive home the importance of that program, which, as we talked about earlier, that CalKids program is a college savings account that can provide newborns in California with a head start. So more information to come. Make sure you subscribe to our listserv for an announcement when this enhancement is live. And before I go into uploading and matching GPAs, for those of you who may be concluding your workshop for the morning, if you're not involved with uploading or matching GPAs, we just want to let you know that we will be sending you a survey. We want to know what you thought of the workshop and what changes you'd like to see next year. Was there information that you'd like to know more about or that you'd like us to cover in more depth next year? Let us know in the survey. And if you liked the presenters, the FAFSA presenter was Dennis, the first CSAC presenter was John, and my name is Tracy. Let us know what you thought. Now, if you didn't like the presenters and you're just thinking, oh my gosh, these are just terrible presenters, just so you know that the FAFSA presenter's name was Tom, the CSAC presenter's name was Richard, and my name is Louise. So, you can definitely add those to the survey depending on how you felt. All right. And then once you take that survey, we will be sending you a certificate of completion where you can print this out and display it in your office and let everybody know that you were an attendee at this year's workshop. So please let us know what you thought. All of our improvements that we've made to this workshop over the years have been the direct result of your feedback. So thank you. All right, now we're going to go into uploading GPAs. So, as I mentioned, high schools in California, at least public high schools, are required to upload GPAs for their seniors by October 1st. And so, if you are involved in anything regarding GPAs, this section is for you. So, stay with me. We're going to get into a lot of great information. So, high school GPA calculation for the purposes of Cal Grant. For Cal Grant consideration, a GPA must be uploaded that is unweighted with a 4.0 maximum. We will not take GPAs greater than 4.0. When you calculate the high school GPA, make sure that you include all failed classes unless that class was retaken and passed. Even if it was taken online, that is acceptable. Make sure you also exclude PE, ROTC, and remedial courses from this calculation. For your current high school seniors, we want you to include 10th and 11th grade GPAs and any summer school classes taken in 10th and 11th grade. So as a whole, that GPA is going to be based on the grades they earned in the 10th grade, 11th grade, and those summer school sessions. If you weren't aware, we also really need you to help us by uploading GPAs for your prior year graduates. On the next slide, I'm going to talk about the importance of this. For prior year graduates, and I'm just talking 1 year prior, not for all years, infinity. I'm talking about your prior year graduates from last year. When you upload their GPA, this should be based on the grades they earned in 10th grade, 11th, and 12th grade, and any of those summer school sessions. For more information about the GPA calculation, I recommend that you visit this link here at the bottom. If you weren't aware, we want GPAs not only from your high school seniors, but also last year's graduating class. That is because that in California Education Code, students have an additional 1 year to qualify for a high school entitlement Cal Grant. This would be a student's second chance to qualify for that really great Cal Grant program. It is the most portable Cal Grant out of all the cycles that John talked about. Make sure that your school or your district is uploading for both classes. So really, they should have 2 batches. This year, you'll be uploading for class of 2026 and class of 2025, your prior year grads. 2 files, 2 classes, okay? So as I mentioned, high school students have an additional year, so technically 2 years to qualify for that high school entitlement Cal Grant. So a student that maybe graduated last year who didn't get a Cal Grant this year, they can still have another chance if they maybe last year missed the Cal Grant priority deadline. Maybe they took a gap year after graduation. I know a lot of students do. I also did because I didn't know what the heck I wanted to do. Make sure that for students who are your prior year grads, class of 2025, it could be for those students that didn't apply for financial aid during their senior year, or they didn't initially have a high enough GPA for Cal Grant. If I quickly go back to this slide here, you'll see that for prior year graduates, you're including those 12th grade grades, meaning that maybe you had a student who got their act together in 12th grade and improved that GPA, and it makes all the difference for that Cal Grant eligibility. Let me go back here. So make sure you're uploading 2 files, 1 for your current seniors and 1 for your prior year graduates. They should always be done as a separate batch. Your reports will combine both sets of students, but your upload files must be separate. If you are from a private high school, by law, you're technically not required to upload GPAs, but we still really encourage you to do so because it makes all the difference when students qualify for Cal Grant. A GPA is required. So please, we ask that you're proactive. Don't let your students miss out on this important financial aid program. If you need assistance, please do not hesitate to contact us. Here at the training team, we can assist you with an ad hoc training. We have lots of webinars and YouTube videos to help you with the uploading process. You can also manually add GPAs if you have a particularly small senior class or prior year class, or if you are adding GPAs after the big batch upload. You can use the non-SSN GPA link under the Cal Grant banner in Web Grants. And when you click that, you will have an option that says Add non-SSN GPAs or test scores. There you can add GPAs one by one manually. Now, if you have a GPA that you're adding manually after March 2nd, that's technically after the deadline. So the student would not be considered for a Cal Grant unless you filed an appeal. We'll talk more about late GPA appeals in just a few slides. But this is a great option, again, if you have a straggler that you missed in the upload, or if you have a late student coming into your school during the school year. Here is the manual GPA submission screen. This is what it looks like when you click on that option. There'll be fields here to enter last name, first name, date of birth, address, city, and zip code. These are the only required fields, but more fields the better, and that's going to aid you in the matching process. We'll need to know their graduation date listed here. We also will need their GPA type, and then when you type in the GPA, do not use a decimal point. You're going to use it as a 3-digit number. So if they had a 4.0 GPA, you would enter it as 400. You'll also want to enter your College Board school code so we know where this GPA is coming from. If you have GPAs that you need to submit after the March 2nd deadline, you can appeal. You can submit an email with an attachment on school letterhead that includes the following information: your College Board school code, your school's contact information, a very brief explanation why that deadline was missed, and if you're appealing for multiple students, you can include the following on the appeal letter. We don't need an attached Excel or text file. All we need are the students' names, their dates of birth, address, their SSID if applicable, what their GPA is, and their month and year of graduation. We are always working in the best interest of the student. CSAC, we're all about being student-centered, student-focused. So if there's any way that we can approve an appeal after March 2nd, we're going to do so. So please don't hesitate. If you accidentally miss a GPA and it's after the deadline, reach out to us. You're going to send your appeal letter to schoolsupport@csac.ca.gov. So I recommend screenshotting this particular slide and putting it on your calendar in the spring in case you do have one that you still need to submit for. All right, and I see that my colleagues have been answering questions in the Q&A, so please continue asking those questions as we move into matching GPAs. So what is important about a matched GPA? I will tell you. In order to receive a Cal Grant, a student must have a financial aid application, FAFSA or CADA, and they must have not only a GPA that's been uploaded, but that GPA must be matched to their application. If a student has a GPA that's been uploaded, but it hasn't yet been automatically matched to their application, that student will not be considered for Cal Grant yet. And so we ask that high school counselors aid us in matching those GPAs. And there are definitely easy ways to do this. We'll go through them in the next few slides. In order to identify which GPAs that you've uploaded that haven't been matched, you can use the non-SSN GPA status report. That can be downloaded by going under the Cal Grant banner in Web Grants, selecting Data Transfer, Report Download, and then downloading this report. That financial aid application status report that I talked about earlier is also very helpful, but the non-SSN GPA status report will list all of the GPAs that you've uploaded and will let you know a simple yes or no. Has it been matched? To manually match those GPAs, you'll go back into Web Grants under non-SSN GPA and select the Match screen. Match non-SSN GPA to Fin App, financial aid application. All right, I'm going to show you what this report looks like and then what this screen looks like. Now, when I'm demonstrating this report and this matching process, I'm going to use a student example. I've run my report for my non-SSN GPA status, and I am looking at the report. Now, this report, this screenshot is 1 year old, so I do apologize, but the information is all the same. I've got my report for CSAC High School. There's my school code. And I'm going to have a long list of students for whom I've uploaded GPAs already. It's going to list their name, date of birth, the GPA I uploaded, and the grad date that I indicated on my upload. If the GPA has already been matched to an application, it's automatic if everything already matches. I'll have a yes under this column. If the answer is no, that means that potentially some of the fields have matched, but not all of them. And that means I still need to manually link that GPA to the student's application. My example student here is Shannon Aguilera Gonzalez. I uploaded her GPA with all of this data, and it hasn't matched yet. In the matched fields column, I have a little hint. It's telling me that there's a possible match for first name, date of birth, and city. But it's not telling me that the last name has matched. So that gives me a little hint that it's possible her last name is wrong, meaning the last name that I uploaded is not matching the last name she put on her application. Let's dig a little deeper. I'm going to go to the match screen in Web Grants, and I'm going to try to search for Shannon's GPA that I uploaded to the system. A pro tip is when you're searching for a particular student, it's easy to just put in the first 3 letters of their first name along with their date of birth. That ensures that you find all possible matches because, again, with that last name not being a match, it could be that she used a different last name. First name matched, but I'm just going to put SHA to make it easier. Date of birth, school code, and I'm going to hit search. And here's what my query is going to pull up. Any students of mine with the same date of birth and the first 3 letters of their first name, SHA. In this list, if I see a student in green, that means their GPA has already been matched to an application. There's no further action needed. I can't even click on this one because it's already matched. Any gray lines here means that there isn't a match yet, and I can manually match it here. When I click on Shannon Aguilera Gonzalez, it's going to highlight in blue, meaning I've clicked on her, and it's going to open up a new screen. Let's see what that screen looks like. This is what Shannon Aguilera's record looks like. Here in green, I see what I uploaded as her GPA as a high school counselor. I uploaded Shannon Aguilera Gonzalez with this date of birth, this address, phone number, and email with a 2.0 GPA and her SSID. In these additional columns, I have records for any possible matches. These are all financial aid applications with potential matches. I have Shannon Aguilera, same date of birth, same address, same phone number, even same email. The difference in that last name made the GPA not able to link to the application. But I know for sure this is my student. There is no doubt in my mind that this is Shannon's application. With that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and match her GPA. All of the other possibilities are not hers. Charlena Tanaka, Shane Drayton, those are definitely not her. So I'm going to find her application among all the matches. I'm going to click the match bubble and submit. There will be a pop-up window here. Are you sure you want to submit? Yes, I'm sure. Okay. I'll click that. It's going to take me back to the match page with all of those records. And guess what? Shannon Aguilera is now matched to her application and she's in green. So I am all good. When you are manually matching GPAs, I recommend following these slides. These are really helpful because it'll show that step-by-step process. Just a couple things for you to note that you may get error messages when searching on this page. If you get these red error messages that no ICER data was found or no non-SSN data was found, first try refining your search criteria or even editing the GPA. If you brought Shannon into your office and say, hey, Shannon, what's up? Why isn't your GPA matching? And you ask her to open up her FAFSA and you see, oh, you put Shannon Aguilera. Let me fix that. You can actually go in and edit the GPA for it to automatically match later on. I'll show you how to do that in a slide. If these messages persist and you've refined, you've edited, there could be some things going on. Either the student hasn't submitted a financial aid application, maybe their application requires a signature or an additional step, or the application was submitted very recently. Ask your student if any of these are possibilities, and that would be the reason why the GPA isn't matching. There's nothing for it to match to. And of course, if you have still error messages and none of these apply, always feel free to reach out to CSAC School Support for assistance. Now, flagged GPAs are those known as gold hold GPAs. When you go into your Web Grants for Institutions portal, you will have an option under the GPA link that says Review Flagged Matched GPAs. Basically, these are GPAs that have been matched to an application, but our system is like, we're not 100% sure if this should be matched, and we want some help verifying that. This is usually going to be in the case of perhaps a student that has multiple GPAs on file, or in the case of twins or triplets or siblings that have very similar information. To give you a quick example, I am a twin. My name's Tracy. My twin's name is Tina. We have the same middle initial. We have the same last name, obviously the same birth date, same address, and same phone number. And so it's possible that as a twin, that GPA of my twin was matched to my financial aid application because everything else matched up. The first initial, the middle initial, the last name, and the date of birth. So what you would do is go in here, make sure that Tina's GPA isn't attached to Tracy's application. When you click on a gold hold record here, it'll simply ask you to review the record and either select yes, verify it's good, or unmatch it if it's not. Make sure that Tina's GPA is not on my application because we were very competitive and I want my GPA on my application. And just so you know, we have some enhanced functionality. This is new as of last year. Last May, we announced it in our listserv. Students can have more than one GPA linked to their application. And this would be in the case of a student having a GPA from one school and another school. If the student maybe transferred schools mid-year and the new school is doing their due diligence and uploading a GPA for them, what will happen is, yes, we can match multiple GPAs to an application, but we're going to use only the highest of the two. So we're not going to get any errors. We're simply going to use that higher GPA and we're going to move forward with that. So just so you know, if you're matching a GPA that already has another one matched to it from a different school, we will use the higher GPA on file at the time. You can also use the editing function if you need to edit the GPA or the graduation date in case there are any issues there. The link to that announcement is here at the bottom of the slide. Editing a GPA is very simple. It is another option for you under Web Grants for Students, and it allows you to overwrite information that you had already previously uploaded in case you uploaded the wrong GPA value, or if you're having to update last names or dates of birth, if there are any errors. The editing window is fairly small. It's only a few months. And so if the editing window closes, I'll show you that on the next slide. If that editing window closes, you can still manually match GPAs through September 30th. Not September 30th of this year, but next year, 2026. The matching process is still the same. You'll still have to do it manually, but just so you know, that editing function is available to you, usually in the springtime. If you want more information and more detailed looks at these matching and editing functions, we have training tutorials available on our website through YouTube. So I highly recommend that you click the link at the bottom of this slide to access our training videos. If this is your first year uploading GPAs, or if you've never matched or edited before, we have very comprehensive guides and videos to help you through every step of the way. Now, if you need to contact us, we have a few different numbers here. Student support is for your students and families. If they have questions that they need answered about their CADA or their Cal Grant, middle class scholarship, or any of the state programs we talked about, they should be calling student support at this phone number and this email address. For you all as high school counselors, if you're a member of an RCO or an RDO, you can reach us at school support. Consider this your express lane to CSAC. We have a separate school line and school email for any of your needs regarding GPAs or web grants access. Reach out to us. If you would like more information about ad hoc trainings or our training videos, or if you still need a copy of today's slide decks, you can email the training unit at training@csac.ca.gov. And also, if you're a Web Grants administrator and need assistance with your account, you can reach out to Web Grants Access at csac.ca.gov. Once again, I remind you to subscribe to our listserv for any updates regarding high schools or Cal Grant deadlines. You'll be the first to know. And with that, I would like to thank you all. This is a really great picture of our training team. If you didn't know what we look like, this is what we look like in our great polos. Thank you so much for your time this morning. You all have had excellent questions and really great insight, and we just wish you the best of luck in this upcoming financial aid season. And just remember that we are here to support you. I will put this back on the screen in case you need to jot these numbers down or take a photo of it. But with that, this concludes our workshop. My apologies for going 2 minutes over, but thanks again for joining us. We hope you have a great rest of your day. John, do you have anything else to add?
You did go 2 minutes over. I have the HR email up, but
Oh dear. Please.
I think we're gonna be okay. Hey,
All
I
right,
just wanted I want to jump on real quick and say thank you, especially thank you to those of you who stuck it out till the end. This is a long webinar. Hopefully you found it helpful. We're going to send out a survey today, and we would value your honest feedback. So if you say it's really long, it's a lot of information. Yeah, we know. Thank you. All right, Tracy, thanks so much for doing a great job in the second half. We will talk to all of you guys. Sign up for more stuff. Come on, you got free time. Sign up for more virtual webinars and try to make it to an in-person one. They're fun. And with that, I'm going to get out of Dodge. Thank you guys again. We will see you soon.